And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons, monsters and serpents, to Brothers of the Serpent podcast, coming to you not live from the 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of science, nestled amongst the dusty bones of an ancient seabed, high atop the Edwards Plateau. So,
got a long Swapcast here with Mike and Maurice. Mind Escape.
And it was a great conversation.
Yeah. But we went long, so we're gonna do all the stuff. We're just gonna go right into it.
Yeah, it was a long and great conversation, so I think we're just gonna cut right into that, and I hope you guys enjoy it.
Hi guys, how are you?
Okay, doing good. Glad to be here.
Yeah.
Good to have you guys on. Yeah. Been listening to your podcast for you guys have been around for a year, a little bit over a year?
Yeah, a couple years. Yep.
Couple years. Yeah, we're approaching, I think, a couple years as well now too. I think this winter it'll be 2 years.
Oh, nice. Good job. Yeah, it seems like we're pretty close in episode numbers. So, do you guys do one a week or?
It depends. We've done one a week. We've done 4 a week.
Oh,
we've done skipped a couple weeks.
We guess we indulge in that. So it depends if we can get people or not. But yeah, we try and do one a week.
We try and do at least one a week. Sometimes lately we've been trying to do 2 a week, usually Tuesdays and Thursdays, but it just really depends on guest schedules and if we're going to do one just the two of us or what the case may be.
Yeah. So, okay. So I know this is Swapcast, so I get to ask you guys questions too.
Sure.
So because Kyle and I actually focus a lot on just us. Like, we're not a very guest heavy show. We do get guests, but for the most part,
some of your shows with the guests, like the Randall Carlson ones. And
right.
I think you've had Brian Keating on, maybe, is that?
Yeah, which we got after I heard him on your podcast. I was like, wow. Yeah.
He's a good dude. So I've heard some of yours that we've had some similar guests on, but it was a different podcast too, which I like hearing, Yeah.
Yeah. So I was going to ask, like, when it's just you, what topics do you usually discuss? Do you have a theme that you stay with, or?
That depends.
We've been doing those slideshows lately.
Yeah, when it's just the two of us. So lately I'm going to systematically go through different time periods through the ancient world. Right now, we're just going to start with ancient Greece, just because I've been reading a lot of philosophy stuff, all of Plato's stuff, looking into Pythagoras, all that kind of stuff. So, and then we're going to move on to the Sophists, and then we'll go to the megalithic structures of Greece and kind of go through that. And I hope to do that with ancient Rome, ancient Egypt, ancient, Acadia, Sumer.
So yeah, that we just we try and go through all the timelines systematically, but for each ancient civilization, we didn't start from the earliest, or let's say ideally we would have started with Göbekli Tepe and or hunter-gatherers and worked our way up to the most modern of ancient civilizations. But I just kind of got into Greek philosophy and pre-Socratic philosophy and just been looking into all that stuff. So we started there, and we're going to start working our way through all that stuff.
What subjects do you guys concentrate on? You said that when you're together you try and do some of the same themes.
Yeah, so we're mostly ancient mysteries, and we focus a lot. Kyle and I are both builders, and we have builders and engineers in our family, and builders and engineers as friends. So that's how we look at a lot. We're looking at ancient civilizations through one of the only things left to us to look at, in some cases, which is their structures, right? So in a lot of cases there are written word, but for instance, with Sumer, it's difficult because the translations are so wonky. Mm-hmm. And even with Egypt, you can read the translation by 4 or 5 different guys of the same text, and it's so different
right
across those translations that they almost have no worth. So we look at them through their structures and the mysteries of how some of these places were built and what was actually in their minds when they were doing it and why were they doing it. So we look at that a lot. Other mysteries too. We go through a lot of the mythology. We're very interested in comparative mythology, like think of Hamlet's Mill kind of thing. Like, why are all these myths carrying the same themes from cultures that are separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years in some cases? So there's something deeper going on here, and that's one of the main things we explore on our podcast. So
yeah, I mean, if I had to categorize it just from what I've listened to, I'd say you guys are definitely geology, building of ancient structures, heavy ancient civilization stuff. I think we focus on more of consciousness and the mind and what goes into that, and a lot of the surrounding subjects like psychedelics, near-death experiences, lucid dreaming, different offshoots of that one main topic. I mean, we did start down the road, like Maurice was saying, we did start off just doing ancient civilization stuff and some UFO stuff, but I don't know. It just, going into the show, I didn't want to have one specific theme, because there's a lot of shows that just have one theme, and a lot of them do well, but my inspiration for even doing this was listening to Joe Rogan, because I would listen I like all of his episodes, or most of them, comedy, and he has all the top, he had John Anthony West and Robert Schock and all those guys on. So I wanted to do a show where it was almost like all people like that. So I started reading all the books of all these people and just try to get as many of those types of people on the show as possible, because that's the subject that really interests me.
Yeah.
And you guys have done a great job with your guests. Like, I remember back shortly after we had started the podcast and I found you guys, like, I was like, man, y'all got Laird Scranton on and all this stuff. You guys were just pulling them one after the other. I was like, that's awesome. We had spent probably like the first year with like few guests, or I should say like 30 episodes in with just us talking about stuff.
Right.
And that's all Michael, man. He reached out and he got a hold of some publishing company, and we kind of, isn't that what happened?
Well, that, and just I started emailing people, and some people some people didn't want to do it, or like, come back to us when you have 100,000 followers or whatever,
Right.
So and that's
we'll
fine.
Talk soon.
I get that, but we've gotten some people that I've read books of these people where I found them interesting, even before we started doing this. So I started reaching out to those people, and if you leave like an extra touch of like, hey, I'm a fan, I read this book, and you make it known that you know what you're talking about, they're more apt to come on and discuss things.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, that episode y'all did with Laird Scranton was fascinating to me. I mean,
he's a smart dude. Yeah.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, it was just a really good interview. So
well, thanks.
Yeah, a lot of these interviews, I come in with a fresh slate. Like, Michael will read the books and stuff, and then I come in and I don't really know all that much, and it's like a massive learning session for me. It's pretty sweet.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you appeal to both types of audiences: the ones who have already done the deep dive and the ones that don't know anything about it.
Yeah, numbskulls. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's me telling him things will explain. And we figured this out as we were going along. Like, me explaining things to him explains things to the audience that don't know. Like, obviously you'll have your advanced people that in these set topics that have read all the books and understand all the research and everything like that. So to those people,
a lot of people haven't, that's just the way it is.
It just depends on who's listening, but for the most part, I mean, we've gotten a good response. Of course there's trolls and nasty people out there, but I think that if you're being honest and you're not really trying to sell something in particular, like you're not trying to push an agenda or anything like that, you're just curious and want to learn, I think people respond to that better as a listener than having one specific thing and making it a point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so what do you guys, I mean, it's hard to answer a question like, what do you think about ancient civilization? But what do you think about some of these mysteries? Like, what do you guys think about when you're looking at these some of these anomalous structures like Baalbek or, of course, the pyramids or Sacsayhuaman in Peru? Like, what do you guys think about with that stuff?
I think the weird thing to me still is obviously ancient Egypt, the pyramids. Not that we know humans built them, but how did they build them?
Right.
So to me, that one's still one of the greater ones in terms of there's so many different theories on how it happened. They think they have a good idea, but that's flip-flop back and forth over time. Baalbek's weird. They obviously chiseled those out. I kind of look at those like an obelisk, though, like, because people question how could they have gotten the obelisk out of the ground. Well, they had, diorite or dolomite blocks, and they would pound them out like stones like that. They have the marks still of the one that's still stuck in the ground. and then they would polish them off. So I look at Baalbek, similar to that, and I think that that's probably along the lines of what was going on there, in my opinion. But I mean, those are so heavy; it's impossible to really know. Yeah, I think that some of those, the heaviest stone ones, are the ones that are anomalous to me, because even the pyramid, the blocks are what, like 1 to 2 tons, something like that.
Yeah, on average. Yeah. There are ones that are very heavy and that are the granite blocks of the King's Chamber. Or the interior chambers are very heavy blocks usually, but yeah, the what makes up the core of the structure, the limestone, is usually 1 to 2 tons on average.
So I mean, that's heavy, but that's nothing like 100 tons or 1,000 tons. So I mean, and then at Baalbek, didn't they find another one that's some underneath the stone of the pregnant woman or something? Is that what it's called? So there's one underneath it that they found as well that's even bigger than that. They haven't really excavated it completely, but it's a lot bigger.
Yeah, 1,680 tons by estimate. That's
crazy.
Damn ridiculous.
So, I mean, to answer...
Who was planning to move that?
To answer your question, I believe that humans did all this stuff. I mean, if you look at the ones in Peru, Sacsayhuaman, and Pumu Punku and all those ones, I think it's impressive, but I think humans did it.
Yeah.
How long ago? I think that's the thing that's up for debate, and that's why people like Graham Hancock, Robert Schoch, all those guys are popular, especially right now, is because it's definitely coming out as more and more things. Even people that don't pay attention to it. Our cousin Rob, who just got into this kind of stuff, is like, oh, did you see this interview, or did you see that, they just found these bones of this proving that the Denisovans were over here and this and that. And I'm like, yeah, that's why I think Graham Hancock's ahead of the curve a little bit, so.
Yep. Yeah, and I think, so with us, it's never a question of did humans do it. We're not talking about aliens or anything like that.
But what I meant by that was just that how old though? Are we talking? Because some people even think that 30,000 years ago, which I mean, I guess anything's possible, but I would bet against that timeline.
Well, anatomically modern humans have been around for at least 200,000 years. So
right. Well, that's the question: is when did the building commence? When did we start doing all this stuff? What was the inspiration, and was there some Younger Dryas impact for sure that wiped most of the planet out? Who knows?
Yeah, there have been bottlenecks in the population. We know that for sure too. That's been demonstrated pretty well scientifically, and the Younger Dryas was probably one of them. Not as big of a bottleneck as some earlier ones that took us down to
Lake Toba, that volcanic eruption in Indonesia that they said they wiped out everybody except for 5,000 to 10,000 people or something.
Yeah, and Randall and other people like him ask, was that volcanic eruption the cause or a result of something else?
So he thinks that there might have even been an impact then,
or something. Yeah, something else, because the volcanic, enormous volcanic eruptions like that are usually preceded by something else. Like there's something that causes that kind of instability.
Could have been some radical plate shifting to something like that.
Exactly. You get enormous cracks in the crust that results in outpouring. Almost, it's not really a volcano; it's outpouring of magma from beneath the crust. You know? So it causes the traps they call the big basalt plates that are in some cases 40 meters thick and cover 2/3 of the United States or whatever. There are just these huge pouring out of basaltic lavas and you're like, okay, where did this come from? What caused this to start? And yes, it kills everything, but was that the actual cause of all the deaths, or was this just part of what was going on, a bigger picture, basically?
Right.
Yeah.
So, I think we're on the same page I listened to your show, like I said before, too. So I think we're on the same page in terms of what's going on with all these ancient civilizations. But to point out, I want to go back. We were talking about our shows. I wanted to mention about your show. The thing I like about your show that I also like about other podcasts that I listen to is that you guys have little segments that you do. You do a little bit of news. You do.
Oh, yeah.
You have your own little subjects and little categories of things that you do, and I like that. I think that's a good way to build
It's a well
audience.
put together show.
It's well put together. It's organized, and usually the shows I listen to, they have different little segments. Like I like Tiger Belly, which is Bobby Lee's comedy podcast, and they've got like little different things that they do. So I think it's the that's what I like listening to. So I think you guys did a good job heading down that road, and I know it's natural too because those are just things you were interested in too. So that's good.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And the segment thing, actually, there's a funny story with that. So we do this. We call it the Tangent Cube. It's a 10-foot by 10-foot shed, pre-built.
Mhm.
You know, you go to Home Depot and you're like, I want that 10 by 10 shed, and they deliver it to your house and set it up for you. You know, wherever you want. So that's what we're doing. We build a studio in here. And when we first started doing the podcast, we got an air conditioning unit that's up on the wall. But when we first started it, it was just a window unit that we had sort of mounted in there. It was enormously loud. So we couldn't have it running while we were recording because it was just in the background, you know. So we had to take a break
here.
Yeah, we had to take a break every 30 minutes to turn the thing on and cool it back down in here before we keep going, because otherwise you're sweating like crazy.
Oh, I
So
see.
that was one of the origins of the 30-minute segments that we do. They give us time to cool everything off, and you know.
Yeah, and then we ended up thinking, like, actually, this works really well because we have a tendency to go off on tangents.
Yeah, that's why it's Tangent Cube.
Yeah, and so we take that 30-minute break, and then we were like, well, where are we going with this? And we'll have a little inside baseball talk. You know, and it's like, okay, yeah, that's what we should talk about.
Yeah.
So we come back on, and then we're reoriented.
Yep.
And so that ended up like helping to organize the shows, and then of course, all of this, like within the segments organization, like the news parts and stuff in the beginning, that just sort of came about organically.
Yeah, that evolved over time.
Oh, I like that. That's good
That's
stuff.
sweet. Yeah, that's like just embracing problems and mistakes and making it, work for you. I like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's exactly right.
So also, so my
Go ahead.
question though was, in you guys, where was the inspiration for the Brothers of the Serpent name and like the logo? I know that logo is obviously the snake eating its own tail. One of my other buddies uses it for something else that he does. He runs another website called Tail Eaters, but
Great.
when no, I mean, whatever. It's different colors and stuff.
I mean, that name is awesome. I'm just saying.
Right,
yeah.
There's no metaphor here.
But
Right.
my question is, like, what was the inspiration behind that?
Okay, so have you read? There's a book called Gods of Eden by William Bramley.
Yeah, I've read it. I think I've got the PDF on my phone.
Yeah, so he talks about the Brotherhood of the Serpent in that book as and this is something that's referenced elsewhere too, but that was sort of the inspiration for it, is that the Brotherhood of the Serpent is and Graham talks about, he doesn't name them, but Graham Hancock talks about a monastic order whose job it has been to carry forward advanced information throughout the ages and across cataclysms and then re-inject them into civilization, right? Mm-hmm. So Bramley calls that the Brotherhood of the Serpent, and the serpent being an ancient reference to knowledge. Okay, so it's a symbol of knowledge, and of course the Ouroboros is an alchemist symbol. Randall talks about this quite a bit, but if you see the Ouroboros somewhere on some structure, they're telling you, okay,
there's hermetic knowledge or whatever.
Yes, hermetic wisdom encoded into the symbols in this building or in this structure or in this painting or whatever. Okay, so all of the symbology and the name all come back to that. Is what we're trying to do, is carry forward the work and try to understand what's happening with history, and sort of perpetuate the truth, which was the job of the Brotherhood. They don't always, so they don't always do it right. And Bramley gets the idea in his book that they seem to have been corrupted, but there are still positive elements within the Brotherhood today. The way he talks about it, he calls it the Brotherhood. Whoever this secret cabal is that's going around in the background, doing things like causing wars and making destruction happen. But that's because it was corrupted way back in the past, way back in the past. And now it's kind of split into two factions. There are the brothers that are the original Brotherhood that are still trying to do what they were supposed to do, and then there's the other part of it that have now basically gone to the dark side. So
that's a pretty sweet name, and I like the background story. That was a good pull, and I've seen some weird shit though having to do with the serpent. A couple times in meditation, a couple times during psilocybin experiences, I've seen this multicolored, rainbowish serpent kind of just swirling around doing some stuff. So I think that there's something obviously to it. There's a reason why you see hieroglyphs and ancient, cave drawings and different things that have serpents, and it's obviously a fascination and symbology wise for fertility and different things. So that's pretty sweet.
There's also the tendency throughout mythology for civilizer gods, quote unquote civilizer, quote unquote gods, to be named in some way or another after the serpent. So Quetzalcoatl was the feathered serpent.
Yeah, I was just going to say that.
He shows up and does what? He teaches them how to have civilization. Same thing with Viracocha in South America. Viracocha is all throughout their most ancient myths.
Right.
And he supposedly shows up in a powered boat.
We talked about that. Was it sacred mushroom? Our sacred mushroom ritual episode. We had an author on, Tom Lane, who wrote a book about his experiences going down to Mexico and South America and partaking in sacred mushroom rituals with like Maria Sabina, who's like a famous curandera.
Yeah, he actually preferred these mushrooms over the ayahuasca. He said that this was the real deal here.
But his book is called
The Quest for Quetzalcoatl.
It's called Sacred Mushroom Rituals: The Search for the Blood of Quetzalcoatl. And when you do this specific mushroom ritual, you meet Quetzalcoatl, and it's like a million diamond serpent that comes, and there's a special way that you eat the mushrooms where they're still living and still in the little...
And you like suck on them with a wasp honey.
Yeah.
Wow.
And how the wasp honey like helps it activate, and I don't even think you like swallow it. Don't you just suck on it until you start tripping?
Yeah, I don't know exact. I forget the exact. It's on our, I think it's episode or part 3 that we did with him. But yeah,
he said you suck on it, and then you feel your spinal cord like turn into a snake, and then you lose yourself. It's pretty interesting though if you have the time. Check that bad boy out.
Yeah, but he's a wealth of knowledge with like Mesoamerican mythology and stuff too. So, but we were talking, and he didn't have heard of Viracocha and how that correlates to Kukulkan and all that stuff.
Yeah, Kukulkan, Quetzalcoatl. Yep.
But in Viracocha, doesn't that translate to foam of the sea? I believe.
Yes.
So.
Yep. But he's also associated with the serpent, and so was Ea/Enki of the Sumer, Akkadian, Babylonian civilization. He's constantly imaged and referred to as the serpent.
Right.
And I mean, the serpent is also in, like, if you want to get biblical Old Testament, there's serpent images, and I'm not talking about not just the Garden of Eden's classic serpent, but that is part of the story. Right, what was the serpent doing in the garden? Trying to give knowledge, right?
Well, yeah, that's the Gnostic.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
The Gnostic version. In the biblical version, he's evil.
Well, but what is he doing in the biblical version?
Even in the evil biblical version,
that's
he's
true.
Like the tree of knowledge.
That's true.
The tree of the fruit of knowledge, and he's saying, "Hey, take of the fruit of the tree of knowledge."
Right. He's like, "Hey, you don't have to be dumb."
So it's this weird dichotomy then that you have between Gnosticism, which you can look at like the Gnostic Gospels, and you could see that there's actually maybe even a little bit more truth in them than perhaps parts of the Bible. But I don't know. I've looked into Gnosticism pretty in depth and read the Gospels. Elaine Pagel's written more than a few books on the subject. That's some interesting stuff too. But yeah, I like the serpent idea, and it's a weird part of humanity.
Yeah, it is.
Also because of why are children afraid of pictures of snakes, and why is it so prevalent throughout ancient civilizations? Why is it still people have super crazy, phobias of it to this day? But then you also have these knowledge seekers and these people looking into esoteric things, and it's the completely opposite thing. It represents good and knowledge. Right. So it's
there's also the uraeus of the Egyptian, pharaonic headdress has the snake coming out of the forehead, symbolizing enlightenment. I mean, like, this is the symbol is replete throughout the ancient world not being an evil thing, but symbolizing knowledge / understanding / enlightenment. There's the Kundalini. You were just talking about your spine turning into a snake. That sounds exactly like Kundalini awakenings. That's Hindu, more Eastern stuff. So so the other play on the words of the Brothers of the Serpent podcast versus the Brotherhood of the Serpent is that we are actually brothers. Right.
Okay.
So we
we're
grew
cousins.
up with we grew up with each other. Oh, great. All right. Keep it in the family. Yeah. So we grew up with each other talking about this stuff, and we haven't always talked about ancient mysteries, but we've always sort of had this kind of banter going back and forth between us about any interesting thing we discuss. And then when we started getting into the ancient mysteries, we started having these long, crazy conversations. The whole like solving the world's problems conversations. Except for it's in the middle of the night, going, were they fucking aliens making these things? So
where's the tape recorder?
Right. Exactly. So
what you're saying is you guys believe in reptilians.
Danger noodles.
Yes,
is what we call them.
We are danger noodles. And yes, we do shed skins on a monthly basis. So, you don't have to believe in reptilians when you are reptilians.
Right. Yeah. Shape shifting and
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's a pretty sweet story. It sounds somewhat similar to ours. Just being cousins, hanging out all the time, smoking a little herb, having some talks, and kind of ballooned into something bigger. So.
Exactly. That's great.
Yeah. When we first started, he didn't even want to do it. I kind of got him to do it. I had this notebook. I had this notebook of like all this. I had this notebook of all this research and notes that I had taken from books that I've read, and just connecting dots of certain things. And he goes, "Why don't we call it Maisie's Notebook?" And he was going to be like the young Jamie type, or I guess for you it would be like the Watcher or whatever, but maybe even present. And then we started doing. I'm like, no, just do it. And we started having these conversations, and it just kind of led to where this is now, where it is what it is. We play off of each other, but at the same time, I'm the one. I guess since we're talking about symbols, if you look at this, I designed our symbol, and
you guys are clearly Illuminati. Talking about it. You're talking about us.
That's what my roommate thinks.
but so obviously the all-seeing eye of God, but I mean if you look at our logo, it's completely split in half. It's duality. We have night and day, and I'm the one searching for the light, and he's the one in the darkness that I'm going to show the light to. And sometimes I get crazy with stuff, and he's going to show me the light, so that kind of a symbolism is what we were going for, or at least I was going for.
It's pretty funny. A lot of these symbols have been just beaten up and made so evil. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Like the black cat. I think that was actually like a sign of good luck back in the day, and then all that witching stuff. It's interesting. Especially in America, it's pretty interesting, but
it is weird how the meanings of the symbols can change over time, or the way people interpret them. I guess not necessarily the original meaning, but they like the serpent, right? We were just talking about that. It's like when you're growing up, you're always looking at this symbol as like, especially if you're raised Christian, it's like, oh, that's evil, it's bad or whatever. But there is something strange about snakes too. So they're interesting. You're kind of like, whoa, you want to like check it out, but you also want to stay away from it.
We used to catch snakes.
We used to love them as kids.
Yeah, we used to catch them all the time.
Yeah, we
caught snakes too. Yeah,
but it's very similar to knowledge, right? If you get it, you have to be very careful, and you can never really tame them. They will always leave. If you know what I'm saying, they're going to choose to go.
Look at boas and all those. Those things will kill your dog and your babies if you let them out of the cage. But they might have fun sitting on your arm or something, and they won't do anything. But then you don't know what they're going to do sneaking out in the middle of the night. So.
Snakes are never having fun unless they're killing something and eating.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm pretty sure boas just look at people as like, they're warm. It's like
squishy.
Well, it's like you are a storage of meat that is also warm.
Yeah.
Right. You are a future meal that right now is keeping me hot.
Yeah.
That's what they.
But the point is,
and only we would take them as pets. That's the thing.
We got to show our dominance,
The point is that you can kind of see the interesting, like the correlation there with knowledge. Knowledge is a similar thing. Like if you're going to seek it and then you gain it, it's powerful. It can kill you.
Yep.
It can harm people, or dangerous. You can use it to. You see what I'm saying? Like, it depends on what you choose to do with it.
Yeah, with care for sure. Yeah.
I think the path of enlightenment's somewhat depressing, to be honest with you. At least from my I'm being honest. At least from my point of view.
That's pretty dark, bro.
Yeah, no, I mean, but what I mean by that is that the more you know, the less mystical or I don't know, magical things that are out there if you're really looking. And when we talked about this last episode, I think that there is this true gap or true fringe of weirdness and weird things and mysteries and ancient mysteries and consciousness-based mysteries and all sorts of mysteries, but the window is a lot smaller than I thought it was when we first started, if that makes sense. So from reading all these books, talking to all these experts, talking to different people, yeah, we've had some people that I don't agree with on or don't buy into what they're saying, but at the same time, we've met enough people and stuff that I feel like there is this true fringe or this true gray area that exists in reality and exists in consciousness. It's just a lot more narrow than I would have thought. So it's kind of depressing in a way. And I don't mean like, oh, poor me. It's just the more you know. You said it's a powerful thing, and it is a powerful thing in the sense that you have to kind of keep putting it into perspective, because if you don't, it kind of gets away from you, and you're kind of like, oh, well, what am I even doing this for? So.
That's interesting. So my experience has been like I feel like I should talk about like what originally happened before I really started deep diving into the mysteries. Is that I thought everything seemed sort of dull then, because I thought that science had basically figured all this stuff out, and the standard model had it all written into a big manual. And it was just accepting the ideas that the standard model science education sort of puts out there, like, hey, this is the way the world is.
Right. And
then if you start deep diving into it, you have to like really destroy a bunch of your own paradigms, and that opens up the possibilities, that there really are mysteries, that there really is something, mysterious about the universe. And in so many fields of science and in so many areas of research, there's just so many unanswered questions, and the more you dive into it, you realize like, oh my god, this question leads to another question, which leads to another. So I kind of had that's sort of what happened to me, and it made the universe more fascinating, but at the same time I also struggled with somewhat of a depressing aspect of it, which was like, wow, everything that I thought I knew is wrong.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting perspective. Actually, now that you say that, I can put my finger on it. So I guess what I was trying to say is that you're right. I agree with you 100%. Same thing. Went to high school, went to college for a little bit. I didn't graduate college, but going through that process, I didn't really care at that time. And then as I got older, I like wanted to know more things, so I started doing this personal knowledge quest and just going crazy on books and research and videos and all sorts of different stuff. And what it is that I feel like humans don't know as much as we think we know, and that by looking at the mind, studying the mind, reading all the research, reading all the consciousness stuff, that a lot of this is illusion, and there is mysteries out there, and we don't know nearly as much as we think we do. But that's kind of depressing to me, that there's not somebody out there that has the answers, or there's not somebody out there that really knows what the hell is going on. So I guess that's the aspect that I'm trying to talk about, is that I wish that there were this secret organization or group that you could join and just get not all the answers, but have a better grasp on things.
There is, man. We're using the symbol for them.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So.
That's why we're talking to you guys. You guys aren't that group?
Yeah.
Let's get out of here. Podcast is over.
Yeah.
No, but that makes more sense to me for sure. I get that. And Russ is one of these people who's like, he loves to find questions. And he's like, look at this. This is unexplainable. All right, okay, moving on. Looking at another one. This is totally unexplainable.
Yeah.
And I'm the type of person that's like, wait a minute. I want to stop and like work on this puzzle for a while and try to find a solution.
Right.
So that, like, I have this urge to do that, to really just like, I'm going to figure it out.
Yeah, he wants to take it apart and figure out how it works, and then put it back together, and it doesn't work anymore.
So in that sense, like I'm kind of like you, where I want to find, well, is there some body of knowledge, or is there a group of people, or have there been people in the past who have claimed to figured something out, like Tesla, for example. I love looking into Tesla's research and taking his ideas and trying to compare them to the standard model of physics and whatnot, and see, like, is the stuff he's talking about real? Did he perhaps discover, something amazing, or many amazing things in terms of physics that I could possibly tap into and figure out myself? Right. That would be awesome. So I am also looking for those answers, but I think the thing that impacted me the most was that I had accepted the standard model basically saying, no, all of that stuff's impossible. Mm-hmm. And so when I realized that there were so many unanswered questions, and especially in terms of physics and science, that opened up the possibilities where I had thought all those doors were closed. So it made the pursuit of these mysteries more interesting, rather than just like a fool's errand, because it's total BS. There's no reason to even look into it.
I also think that this is going to sound a little, I don't know what the word is, but basically the answer is that you need to be able to ask questions. That is the answer. In other words, the path to follow is the path of questions. Right, and so like the first step, like Kyle's talking about, is getting rid of the idea that there are answers that can be gained. And once you've done that, that is, in a paradoxical way, the answer. Because once you have realized that answers aren't what you're going for, really, what you're going for are the right questions, then suddenly all these paths open up, and you can approach answers that there isn't ever really an answer to stuff. Mm-hmm. So you can, but by asking all the correct questions, or learning that there's a way to do that, or to narrow down questions until you're asking the right ones, or the best ones. Maybe not right. Maybe right is the wrong way to say it, but better questions. So you're working your way down a path of questions constantly, and each one of those questions leads you to information that leads to more questions, right? Mm-hmm. And that is the answer to. That does show you, like, almost immediately, that everything has much more meaning than it seems to have. Sure. And also what you were saying, that a lot of stuff is illusion, including the idea that we pretty much got the universe figured out. We just need to fill in the details. Right. That's a huge illusion. It's completely false. So, like, I like to jokingly say that, like, the only people who think that they understand stuff are people that know absolutely nothing about it, right? Because the more you learn about something, the more you understand. We don't know anything about this yet.
Exactly. Really. That's it right there.
That's why Plato thought the only person worthy of being king was Socrates, because he knew what he didn't know.
Right. That's right. The wisest man that he knows nothing.
Yeah. That's interesting. And we talked a little bit about this last episode, too, when we were talking about lucid dreams, but I think when you look at language and you look at writing, those two things are basically creating reality, or creating consciousness, because once you start memorizing those things, you're building this whole world. And even science is just a built up scaffolding of this thing that we're all participating in. But we're giving purpose to something that didn't even exist before us, if that makes sense. So to say that's objective truth, to me, is false, because there's no way that could be objective truth. We created it. Right. We're this observer, if you will, and we don't know anything else for sure. Maybe something created us, maybe not. Maybe there was just some sort of Big Bang thing that happened, which is the academic model, and that gets... as you mentioned, there's different versions of that. There's the Big Bounce. There's all sorts of the multiverse theory. So you can go on and on and on with all that. But it's this weird thing I think about lately, where just language and communication with other people is what's building. It's almost like The Sims. You see, if you're a character in The Sims, and once you start talking to somebody, it builds that into the game, and then more people get added, and then more people get added, and pretty soon it's this collective thing. So I'm not a big simulation guy either. I can be convinced if there's more compelling argument or a more compelling theory or argument or something having to do with that, or evidence, but that's just my thought on it. I've just been looking into ancient philosophy and ancient religions and stuff. It just seems like a lot of this stuff is just our creation, which is great. I think it's awesome, and we're obviously inspired by something, but I think we know far less than we think we do, and I think that sometimes I think we're just, spinning our own wheels, but that's just my opinion. I try to stay away from that type of thinking because it's kind of toxic, but...
And maybe there are things that we might never know. That's the bottom line.
Well, I've come to grips with that.
That is it's hard to come to grips with that.
That is a bottom line for sure. The acceptance of perpetual mystery is a big part of this. Which is why, I had to look. Like when I started diving into a lot of this stuff, I was looking for answers too. And I went down all kinds of different rabbit holes that a lot of people go down the same path. But eventually what I learned was that what's more interesting, because there are never answers. You follow some rabbit hole and instead of having an end with a sign that says answer A for this rabbit hole is blah, 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 blah. Instead, it either vanishes into a weird forest of no rabbit hole. Like suddenly you're in a forest and you're just lost amongst the trees and you don't even know where the path is, or it turns into a million little rabbit holes that you could never follow. Right. And that's when I started to learn the value of the question rather than than looking for answers. And so I started looking for questions, because looking for questions is opening up the possibility, basically.
I like that.
Yeah, let's look for better questions, and having a question about something acknowledges that there is a mystery there. And that a lot of times is the first battle that you have with people you talk to about this kind of stuff. They're like, oh, they know how they built the pyramids. You're like, no, they freaking don't.
What's your guys?
Well, here's a question for you. Do you guys have a favorite ancient structure?
Oh, wow.
I know it's tough, but there's got to be something that either popped up or was the first one.
It's a real Maurice special right there, folks. You heard it first.
Stumped. Podcast over. Bam.
I know it's like saying, what's your favorite movie, but there's always something that pops up to your mind, or something that has
Maurice. What's your favorite color?
Impact on you.
But I think I've answered this question before, actually, and I can't remember what it was. I think they change over time. The song,
right.
For a long time, it was the Great Pyramid, because I was in that rabbit hole of looking at all of the interesting math that was involved in the geometry, all of the interesting aspects of the interior, and what would be the purpose of this thing. It's just an endless mystery. And now even with the muon scans and stuff that they're doing, the Scan Pyramids project, they just had a story where they've confirmed that additional chamber that they thought they found with the first muon scan. So
it's now been confirmed in multiple ways.
Yes, now it's been confirmed in multiple ways. There is another chamber,
and it's bigger than they thought.
And it's above the Grand Gallery, and it extends out towards the main entrance to the descending passage on the exterior of the pyramid, slightly above that. And that is just, once again, it's like, here we go. This thing is going to be revealing even more secrets. So that is probably one of my all-time favorite ancient structures, but. The stuff we had talked about before, Baalbek is, it's almost like Baalbek is more interesting because of the quarry.
Right.
And just the fact that this, the trilithon stones over there at Baalbek, came from that quarry. It's that whole group of thing. It's not so much like, wow, this structure is amazing. It's in that scenario, that's a favorite because of the seemingly impossible nature of how to get those stones over there without a road or without any infrastructure.
Do you think the Romans built that or no?
Not the Trilithon.
They built
the Temple of Jupiter, for sure.
What's fascinating about Baalbek is the platform, not all the stuff that's built on top of the platform.
Yeah.
Right.
Even though that stuff is also interesting, Jupiter is enormous.
And if you look at the platform from Google Earth, it kind of looks a lot like the Temple of Man.
Yeah, it's a guy holding something.
It looks like he's holding a man bag.
So who do you think built it then?
Or a beer mug or something. No idea.
And what's also interesting is that thing that he's holding, like you said, beer mug or man bag or whatever. That's where
we call those ancient handbags.
Yeah, that's where the Temple of Bacchus is, and Bacchus is the god of wine. So it's telling you something, right?
Mm-hmm.
They built Bacchus on top of the man bag, right? So it's like water of life. It's something's going on there. Spirits, I don't know. It's an interesting. Yeah.
So I think I kind of agree with Graham Hancock's take on it that the original, like that these structures that we see, that we can definitely say the Romans built these structures. They were just like in so many other ancient structures, newer, more recent cultures came along, found these ancient foundations or some ancient structure or ancient work there, and they built on top of it. They revered it. They may have tried to restore it as much as they could, clean it off, whatever, and build there. Like, I think to me, it seems pretty obvious, but of course, I'm not a scholar of all of that work. It's just the arguments that I've looked at, and especially the ones that Graham lays out, seem pretty obvious that the Romans found that area and then went and built on it. And if you look back at like the Epic of Gilgamesh, they talk about going to that area. Yep. In the land of the cedars or whatever, which is in the same area as Baalbek, where Humbaba was, the guardian of the city of the gods or whatever, that they had to go fight and all this. I mean, that's like ridiculously ancient. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that Humbaba was there guarding the buried structures of the
right. And so when Gilgamesh
or whatever,
when Gilgamesh and Enkidu are making their, like, after I can't remember if it's before or after they killed Humbaba. I think it was after.
Yeah.
They start digging up all the cedars by the roots and pulling them up, and they start uncovering these ancient structures under there with massive stones and clearly ancient giants were buried there and stuff. You're just like, yeah, okay, Baalbek.
Yeah, it's Baalbek. That's pretty much. Yeah, and there's another platform, but the Temple Mount is also a platform, just like Baalbek, has enormous blocks down in the base of it. It's seems like it was built by the same people, whoever they were, a long, long time ago, and it's been built on top of ever since. Just like the Temple Mount has structures that have been built on it for thousands of years. It's
What about the Parthenon? I mean, isn't that in Greece?
Yes, and the Parthenon and the Colosseum, they all are also built on top of older things.
But I think the Parthenon specifically has a crazy large foundation block, too, that's similar to Baalbek in size, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and there are also like enormous multi-level sets of catacombs and tunnels and things underneath those structures that some of them are older than, it's hard to tell when very sophisticated later cultures have occupied the spot. It's almost impossible to tell what was done when and where, why, and who.
Yeah.
Well, we do it to this day. Somebody's buys a ranch and, hey, let's put an addition on, or let's rebuild the house. So
or look at the urban and exploration people that do stuff in London or in Paris. They go down into the sewer systems, the modern sewer systems, and then they end up in older sewer systems, and then they find like an entire Victorian theater down there.
Yeah, that's crazy.
A movie theater that was lost, right? How do you lose a freaking theater? And then they keep going, and they get into older tunnels, and these are now like medieval period, and they get older ones, and now they're looking at Roman stuff. It's like, okay, it's the same thing with our cities now, just like you said. Right. So, but going back to the favorite structure question, I am fascinated with Gunung Padang in Indonesia, and that's because it's still a giant mystery. They did those tests, and they got dates that were like 25 to 30,000 years old, and then all work stopped. The archaeologists came in and were like, no, and got the government to shut it down, and it's been in limbo ever since. And I'm just like,
yeah, I think that one's definitely a mystery. I think though that one could go either way. I think that one's like, obviously there's stuff that people did there, but is the whole thing this giant pyramid? I don't know. I would have to see.
Yeah, it's not a pyramid. That's
or a structure. Yeah,
it's a structure. Yeah, I'm
same thing with those Bosnian pyramids, right?
Yeah, well, okay, the Bosnian pyramids I have a harder time with. I think that what we're looking at there is probably like human modification of existing.
That's what I was going to say, is that in many cases, like even the Great Pyramid of Egypt is not all built.
Yeah.
I mean, they dug the passages down below the base level of the pyramid, and so it's like there was an original sort of
primeval mound
there that they built it over, and then the Sphinx is the same way. There's the yardang sticking out of the ground that they carved, and then they dug out the Sphinx. So it's sort of a combination of building and modifying natural features.
Right. Yeah, so it's, in one way you could look at the Sphinx and say, well, that's just natural stone formation, right? Well, it's just been modified. No one stacked any blocks up to make the Sphinx.
Well, right, but they quarried around the Sphinx to build the Sphinx temple with those blocks, and that's why.
Yes, 100%.
And that's where you see that water erosion, which is the big, topic of debate when you talk about the Sphinx, is how old is the Sphinx, and you got the people that say it's 5,000 years old, then you have the people that say, oh no, it's way older than that, it's 10,500, and then you've got the people, John Anthony West, it could be 30,000 years old. Right. So with that, I tend to agree that it's probably older than thought, but who knows? And then you got to look at the layers of shoal and how that plays into that. I don't, if you look at like the geology, because I've gotten a couple fights with people on Reddit, and they'll send me a bunch of shit to read. So then I'm reading like all this academic stuff on top of all the alternative stuff, on top of all the mainstream stuff. So it's
been there.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff on it. That's for sure.
Yeah. The thing that I like to point out about the Sphinx dating is that just taking Robert Schoch's work on the Sphinx, as a pretty decent authority on geological erosion,
specifically soft rock erosion.
Right.
Yeah.
He says, John Anthony West has said that he's put the most quote unquote conservative dating on it, and it's he's thinking it's going to be older than the pyramid, perhaps 12,000 years old. But typically in geology, a conservative date for erosion or natural stone is older.
The long one.
Yeah, so a conservative date would be further back than, so if they tried to say, well, this is much younger, that would be the opposite of a conservative.
Right. That would make
you're talking about
mad.
Conservative in terms of academic thought as opposed to conservative of the way geology works.
That's what I'm talking about.
Those are both academic thought. Right.
The academic thought in geology is that these things take extremely long periods of time. So a conservative date on an age of erosional features would be the older date.
Right. No, but what I meant was conservative in the sense of trying to appease the people that write the books.
Yes.
Is what I meant.
You can't rewrite the standard model, but not the standard model of geology. That's what I'm trying to say. It's conservative for the archaeology, but not conservative for the geology.
Right.
Which is weird, right? So it kind of tells you, it's like, okay, well, he's not wanting to make too many waves, but he's willing to go out on a limb and upset the archaeologists.
I find that fascinating. And I find it fascinating that there's so many of these people, these academics, that, let's say they're anthropologists or archaeologists. A lot of those people just have art history backgrounds. They don't have geology backgrounds. So we're going to have these people study pyramids and stone and stonework and different things. Why wouldn't you have a mason, or why wouldn't you have somebody that's familiar with those processes?
Engineers, masons, geologists,
architects,
physicists.
Yeah, mathematicians. Yeah, but I agree with that they're not specialized in that, and they're very. And I guess this is true in most academic fields, but they're very jealous of their particular bailiwick. They don't want you coming in. They get really mad if someone from an outside discipline comes in and says, "Well, based on my discipline, everything you said about this is completely wrong," and now I have all this hard evidence about that. They don't like that.
Right.
They don't like that. And so if, like Kyle was saying, it's interesting that they say Schoch took a conservative date for the Sphinx, but it's not. In terms of geology, that is incredibly controversial to claim that erosion happened that fast on limestone. So it's controversial on both ends. It's weird.
That's what I was saying. He sort of picked a happy medium. So you could say that it's more likely that it's older.
Yeah.
In that, looking at it that way is my point.
Right.
It's more likely that it's older than his conservative date of 12,000-ish, roughly around 12,000 years old.
How old do you think it is?
I have no idea. I definitely think it's very old. I just don't think I'm not a geologist, so I don't know. But we are surrounded by limestone where we live here, right?
Well, I'll make it. I'll just say so. I think it's going to line up with the heliacal rising of Leo on the spring equinox.
Which one?
It'll be 12,000 years old.
Yeah, so I think it's old, and I wouldn't have a problem with it being 100,000 years old. I mean, because I mean, I don't think it's that old, but I wouldn't have a problem if it turned out to be that old. We have been around. I mean, anatomically modern humans have been around for twice that long.
Yep.
And I just find it hard to believe that we went through that people that are basically just like us went for hundreds of thousands of years without ever trying any of this stuff that we're doing now. Or at the very least building structures and carving things and so
but you could say that so you're saying, okay, so 200,000 years of Homo sapiens sapiens.
Yes.
And this brings up the point of like different ages of men. Is it possible we only know about for sure, let's say 11,600 years of history based on like structures that would be Göbekli Tepe.
Right.
Before that's hunter-gatherers. So that's only 11,000 years. So you look at out of 200,000 years, okay, so now we're talking there could have been a few of those in there. I'm not debating that. But how advanced did they get, and what level did it rise to? And they obviously didn't get into metallurgy or anything, because I think we would have been able to find stuff like that by now.
Well, so with the metal stuff, I'm actually less surprised because metal does not preserve. You can't preserve it.
But I mean, if they were really getting...
How old are those gears that we found?
But I'm talking about like titanium, like alloys and stuff like that. That's what I'm saying about advanced. I don't mean like just making iron or copper with arsenic in it or whatever the case may be. I'm talking about like real stuff that we like metal, spaceship grade aluminum or something like that. You know what I'm saying? So
stuff like
that.
Aluminum does stick around for a lot longer, but it also...
How long do you think?
Aluminum can last a long time, but if it's left out in the elements, it won't because rains...
Right, a car will rust out in 150 years to nothing.
Right, so in 1,000 years, you need forensics to find out if a car was sitting somewhere, right? If you just left a car out in the field for 1,000 years, in 1,000 years, you'd need forensic science to determine there was a car there.
Right.
And if no one's looking for a car, they're never going to know there was a car there.
Yeah, right. So if you include in that the possibility of catastrophic change on the earth and
completely erases the surface.
Then let's say you have a couple of thousand years for things to sit around and rust away, and then you have a catastrophe that just rearranges the soils and everything in the area and spreads everything out and drops it and picks it up and moves it to other places. Like what are you going to find?
Right. Yeah.
The only thing that you're going to find is something in an area that has never been disturbed by catastrophe. In stone, and pretty much everything else is out of the question. You know?
And I'm sure you guys have looked at Forbidden Archaeology, right? The Cremo book. Have you guys gone through any of that stuff?
I think I belong to some group on Facebook, Forbidden Archaeology, but I've never read the book. I didn't know there was a book for Forbidden Archaeology.
Yeah, so there's a fantastic book called Forbidden Archaeology where it's Michael Cremo and his co-author. I can never remember the guy's name, huh? Yeah, so they basically dug through archaeological records from the past 200 years, and they found all the anomalous ones. Where basically, and they were going through like archives, like they weren't just digging through newspaper articles. They were going through archived records in academic libraries, where people had written reports on different finds and stuff. And he basically made a book out of all of them, all the ones that are totally anomalous, basically where you're finding human remains in impossible, quote unquote, impossible contexts.
Richard L. Thompson.
Yeah, Richard Thompson.
Sorry,
all right, I'll look that up.
Not even a D in there anywhere.
Just completely got that one wrong.
You think that's on Kindle?
Yes, I have it on Kindle. So he got it abridged. So Forbidden Archaeology, he sometimes jokingly refers to it as forbidding because the book is enormous. It's just gigantic tome. He wrote an updated version that took out a lot of the scholarly type arguments that just has all the data in there.
Sure.
And that one's called Hidden History of something like that.
Yeah, Hidden History of the Human Race.
Yeah, that's start with that one, and then if you want all the details, you can get Forbidden Archaeology and read, and where he's just quoting papers and stuff. But Hidden History of the Human Race basically goes through the same cases, but doesn't have all the enormous amounts of the bibliography and stuff. So it's good. Sure. It's good to start with. But anyway, he goes through one of the sections, one of my favorite sections in that book. He goes through anomalous finds in coal mines. Right. And so down in coal mines, 2 miles beneath the surface of the planet, they're mining coal, and they start finding freaking walls made of blocks buried in the coal 2 miles beneath the surface,
Ashlars.
Yeah.
Where basically. Though?
Kentucky.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's sweet. I've been down in some of those caves splunking. Yeah.
But 2 miles beneath the surface that's way down there. The guy with one of the miners that was down there was saying like it was so deep they had to pump oxygen down there to them. So they that's insane. Yeah. I was I was probably not even 100 feet down, and so we're talking like
crazy. He took the Zoolander route.
Came out all ashy.
He got black lung.
No, but yeah, that's pretty sweet, man.
There's also and this one you can look up. It's very interesting. The and this is not so much structures as it is anomalous human remains. So the gold rush, the California gold rush, they were basically mining underneath Tabletop Mountain, right? So there was a canyon next to the mountain, and they would go down to the bottom of that canyon and then dig straight in, like basically run shafts into the mountain or drifts into the mountain looking for gold that was on a paleo surface, right? So the mountain has basically moved over top of a paleo surface in the intervening, however, hundreds of millions of years, they think, right? So down there beneath the mountain is an actual ground level layer that used to be on the surface. And there are riverbeds, very ancient riverbeds there, full of gravels and stuff. And that's where they're finding these enormous gold nuggets in the riverbeds, right? That was part of the gold rush. So the guy who was in the California USGS at the time started getting these reports from these miners that they were finding human artifacts in the freaking riverbeds and around, in these mine shafts that they were making. So he goes down and starts collecting them, getting reports, right? So there was one that I remember clearly. There was a huge petrified tree trunk that they had found. They're digging all along the paleo surface. So a trunk of a tree fell down and then it gets covered up. But alongside of the trunk is remains of a human skeleton, also fossilized, and like stone tools, right? And according to the geological science, that surface that ground level area hasn't been on the surface for like 200 million years.
Wow.
So something's wrong there, right? Something is either the geology is wrong, or we've got an entire evolutionary human history past wrong, and that's the whole point of the book.
That's about right.
Yeah. You're right.
Either this is wrong or this is wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
Someone's wrong here.
Right.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty interesting. I have never heard of that book. I'll have to check it out for sure.
Yeah.
It's pretty funny to think back though on all the stuff you learned in high school. You guys must think about that, like about Egypt and how the pyramids were built and this and that. And it's like hardcore facts. Right. And you get out of there and you're like, what are they doing?
Yeah, exactly.
But they won't change the books. They won't change the text.
Right. And so going back to the Sphinx, like that's what's interesting about it. Like, and here I am saying like a bunch. Even if
totally, bro.
We all got it, man.
Seriously, bro. Okay, so I mean,
we'll do the next episode all words.
Right. Okay. So even if the Sphinx is just a couple of 100 years older than they think it is, than they say it is, that still the whole house of cards comes tumbling down because the Sphinx is at the beginning of dynastic Egypt. If the Sphinx was actually built or constructed a couple of 100 years before they think it was, that puts it in pre-dynastic period. And then the whole house of cards of the entire Egyptian story they've been telling themselves falls apart. This is why they don't want to change it.
Yeah.
Not just 1,000 years. It doesn't matter if you just move it a couple of centuries. If the whole story falls apart. So it's not. That's what makes the whole thing so interesting, because people have asked me like, well, what's the big deal? Like, why not just say, okay, so it's older than they thought? No, you can't do that, because they have this entire timeline of people and kings and pharaohs and whose son was whose son and who built what when and what's connected to what. And if you pull the Sphinx out of that mix, the whole story falls apart because it's at the very bottom in terms of the timeline.
Yeah, I mean, I find that problematic in a couple different ways. So from doing research on the ancient Greeks and the pre-Socratic Greeks, that's like starts around 600 BC, somewhere around there. We're talking 2500 BC. And if they have a hard time piecing together who's dad in ancient Greece and how long each person lived and different things, it's crazy to think that even the ancient Egyptians, yeah, they had hieroglyphs, but the Greeks wrote stuff down too, and they had certain things as well. That it's not as certain when you look into that kind of like, especially the philosophy and who said what and who was whose teacher and how long each person lived. So the fact that ancient Egypt is so set in stone, no pun intended, is crazy to me, to just not at least be open-minded that you could find something that would contradict what we know or something along those lines.
Right. Yeah. And so they get the king's secession of the secession of pharaohs from the king's list.
Right.
Which is, Egypt has quite a few of those, and for the most part, all the different versions work with each other. They sort of overlap, and there's in some cases there's anomalies in various ones, but for the most part, all the different versions they found agree with each other. Right. But the problem is that that modern Egyptologists only accept like the last part of the list, the most recent part, because the Egyptian king list actually records kings going all the way back for 30 or 40,000 years or more.
Yeah, it's like the Sumerian kings list.
That's exactly right. There are patriarchal lists that exist from some of these most ancient cultures. The Sumerians had them, the Egyptians had them, and even the biblical patriarchs in some cases follow this same thing, that people lived longer. They had so you look at the Sumerian king list, and it's claiming that somebody so-and-so reigned for 36,000 years.
Well, that's been used for a lot of the ancient alien stuff, the Sumerian one, and the Egyptian Turin king list, I believe, is because that's the one that shows older as well, I believe.
Also in the pyramid text, it has them. Yeah.
So you look at those, and they're kind of used by people that are like, oh, see, aliens did genetically alter humans for sure, or whatever the case may be, which is obviously, I think, a strike against those lists in terms of when people bring them up, it's kind of like a fringe thing. It's not really considered, like what you're saying, taken seriously for the 30 or 40,000 year mark or whatever.
Right. Yeah, I'm not invoking aliens again. I'm just saying, like,
yeah, you did. I heard you.
Damn it, guy's on to me. But if we're going to take the Egyptians at their word, but not this part, you know what I'm saying? It's like you're presenting something as evidence and then saying, but just ignore all of this over here.
Sure.
But take all of this so seriously that you can't question it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But not this part.
It's the common theme though. I mean, what you're talking about is uniformitarianism, which is John Anthony West talked about it a lot, that there's this idea that everything progresses and everything evolves in a linear line, and we know that to not be true for the most part. And even if you look throughout,
well, they clearly do stuff we didn't, because we can't figure it out.
Yeah,
you look at the Yuga cycles, and there are moments of time where there's golden eras and bronze eras and periods of enlightenment and different things, and then you get like the Dark Ages where not much is written, not much is move the needle or anything like that. So I have no doubt that the uniformitarianism timeline thing's pretty much just a tool for academics, basically.
Yeah, and the other thing I've been asking myself recently too, this idea of recorded history and how civilization begins with people who write, people. So like for a long time, the recognition of a civilization is, did they write things down? Of an advanced civilization, right? So Sumer and Egypt, this is why they're considered the first major civilizations, because they have lots of writing. But what if it's, if you look at the Yuga idea, and then a lot of ancient texts, very ancient texts and myths talk about the advent of writing as being an actual negative thing. Mm-hmm. So combining that with the Yuga cycles, I've been wondering if writing is the result of a lessening of consciousness to a point to where we needed it.
Maybe.
So the beginning of writing is actually the beginning of the end of real civilization, just like John Anthony West would say.
Yeah, and in that, just to connect that to the King's List, if there was a period long ago where we were more enlightened in terms of consciousness, and we didn't need writing, and say you could transfer your your consciousness in some way to your son or to your predecessor. That could be a reason why the kings lists have these ridiculously long periods of one king, because it's sort of like the same consciousness running the civilization for how many thousands of years.
Like an archetype of a person that's being passed down, basically.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you could imagine, perhaps if sort of maybe a utopian idea, but if we had that ability, maybe our civilizations would last much longer and through all these cataclysmic changes that happen periodically in Earth history. So you could have a kingship that lasts for 36,000 years. Even though the structures might get destroyed, the land gets wiped out, the people die, the consciousness that's part of the civilization continues and rebuilds and whatnot.
Yeah.
Just going out on a limb.
No, that's great.
That's a great point.
I mean, I think about that too. I also think about time and time dilation and how time is affected by certain things and maybe cataclysms, maybe positions within the universe. And I don't know, do you guys know like the atomic clock experiment with time dilation?
Tell me about it.
So if you drop a clock, these atomic clocks, it's like super, super accurate. You drop one higher up in the atmosphere and you drop one lower in the atmosphere and they fall down, the one that's closer to the Earth speeds or slows down. So basically the more gravity there is, the more time slows down. Yeah. So if you think about time from the aspect of you ever hear about Einstein's like thought experiments where how long if a rocket went light speed, the distance for each of them, it would be different amount of years for the speed that it's traveling at. So
time dilation for sure.
So I think about that too, is there's a couple different things that maybe time is shifted at some point through some sort of cosmic event. Number one. Number two, maybe time was just calculated differently, because we know the Sumerians based everything off of 60, and then later on we got our calendars and everything from the Gregorian calendar or something that's like the modern one. So just the way I look at time too, and it's connected to consciousness in the sense that we use it as a tool to divide up our days, divide up tasks, divide up whatever. And what does it say in the Bible? Like Moses lived to be what?
Up to 600 and
600
something.
So what's going on there? Did he really live to be 600 years? Or is it something like you're talking about where it was that consciousness of that person or that archetype? Or was something weird going on? Or who knows? I don't know. I've been looking into a lot of possible explanations for stuff like that. And
one of the mysteries that we look at a lot, and we have discussed this quite a bit on the podcast, is the confusion of tongues. Most in the Bible it's referred to as the Tower of Babel, that incident, right? But it's referenced in myth throughout the world, called the confusion of tongue or the confusion of lip. The loss of some kind of language, that where basically before this happened, everyone could communicate, and then afterwards we were all split into these little groups, splinter groups that were separated by language barriers. That's a really strange thing to have in a myth. Like, what exactly are we talking about here?
Right.
No pun intended. But like, what happened there? And it's really strange. So there you've got that, and then you also have, then you have this thing they refer to, the deluge, the destruction of the world, the flood, the whatever, fire and ice. And before that, it's always before that last destruction that human life was a lot longer, or was considered to have lasted a lot longer. So the Old Testament biblical patriarchs, there were 8 of them, and they all had very long lives all the way up to the last, to Noah, and that was it.
Yeah, Noah was the last one.
Noah was the last one after that. And then it even says in the Bible, there's a quote where God actually says, now man's, his days will be limited to 120 years. And like, no one in ancient times that we know of lived 120 years.
Right.
People died much younger than that, but
some people lived old though. I think it was Pepe II, Pharaoh of Egypt, lived to be 99 years or like 100 years old, and he was still leading the army, which is crazy.
I think what you meant was the like mortality rates were in terms of like looking at ancient.
Right.
I wonder about that though too, because I mean, you look at like ancient
longevity,
Asia or ancient Asians too, a lot of those people live to be super old too. So it's
right, and they also have legends of people that were practically immortal, lived for hundreds and hundreds of years.
So I mean, I get what you're saying. I think what you're saying is back then there wasn't as much medicine and stuff, so the chances are but there would be a few of those people that would sneak past and like make it to be super old without needing all that medicine, whether it be antibiotics or whatever. So
right, but what I'm saying is that what in some cases what the myths seem to do is paint a picture of a an antediluvial world before the destruction, where everyone just lived a long time. Not just certain people or certain favored people or certain patriarchs or certain chosen ones of God, but everyone had long lives. And then there was this enormous cataclysmic change, and that didn't just wipe the face of the earth and kill a whole bunch of things and everything, but it also it drastically changed the entire cosmic environment. It made enormous changes to the atmosphere. And maybe if the sun was involved, like Robert Schoch thinks, if the sun changed also, then that changes all kinds of of energetic things that are happening to our planet. That and just in terms of solar radiation, most people die from cancer of some form, failure of tissue to regenerate due to cancer, which is usually due to a
telomeric degradation.
Telomeric degradation, but also mutation due to radiation.
Yeah,
we're all being bombarded by radiation all the time, and most of it comes from the sun. But there's a lot that comes out of stone. All rock has a certain amount of
granite's
has radon in it. Yeah, so we're all being bombarded by radioactive particles all the time. But if there was a period in the past where our atmosphere was thicker or the magnetosphere was stronger and it protected us more from solar radiation, maybe we did live for hundreds of years and it wasn't a big deal. I mean, it isn't that hard to believe. Now, I have a little trouble with thinking that somebody lived for 36,000 years.
Right.
But I don't have a problem with humans on average living for several centuries.
Sure.
You know. And so you change the environment and
who knows what happens.
Right, exactly. We just don't know because it's not the environment we're in now.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's what I think about that stuff a lot too, and I think a lot of it comes down to we have no idea what these people's consciousness was like or what the living conditions on the earth were like at that time. So it's really hard to go back and piece these things together. So I think it just keeps bringing it back to the point, like, what do we really know and how do we really know it? And I think
we can only follow the story that we know. Life might have been who knows what back then. So,
but I think having that narrative is easier for people though, or to teach people to move society along. I think in some regard, I mean, we all want to know the truth, and there's some people that don't care about the truth. So it's this weird thing where you have some people, maybe even, I guess most of this stuff's considered esoteric. So that means that not many people are really gaining access to it or at least interested in it. So most people are just content living their day-to-day life and not worrying about where do we come from or what happened 10,000 years ago or whatever the case may be. So I think it's easy for these narratives to be pushed because people are more likely to follow that lifestyle, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And that's also part of the driving force for me in terms of where do we come from and what's going on is I think that's the only thing we should be trying to figure out. You know, Graham talks about we're a species with amnesia, and it's like imagine yourself you wake up somewhere, you just wake up in a room and you don't know who you are and you don't know what you're doing there and you don't know where you are. And what is the first thing you start doing? Trying to figure all those things out.
Right.
Because if you don't,
just go get a job.
Go get a job. Just hit the bar on the way home.
Find out what.
Well, that's the exact point though. It's the booze and all that stuff, man. And people are content with just going to the bar, going to their day jobs, watching the TV, and ignorance bliss? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it can be. I mean,
depends on what kind of life you want to lead.
I've gone through my phases.
I don't know how fulfilling that life is.
I mean, earlier in my life, in my early 20s, I was fine with just partying and going out. And
well, that's the thing, though. How fulfilling was that life?
I mean, it teaches you. You still learn, but I wouldn't say it's fulfilling in the sense of like doing this podcast or doing research or really going down a rabbit hole. There's something special about finding like a new topic or a new book and really going deep on it and putting pieces together and finding new things and trying to find things that people haven't even found before, which I think we've done a few of those on a couple of our podcast episodes. And when it happens, you feel like that feels good. I've never heard anybody talk about that. But at the same time, you got to appreciate the people that are out there that are doing all this research and putting these pieces together, like you say, Graham Hancock and Robert Schoch, and these people that are also going out on a limb that their lives would be easier if they just went with the flow of academia or being a journalist or writing a book and a mainstream book or whatever the case may be. And that's why.
Well, it's good to create this content and inspire people, whether it be a podcast or I know you guys are into music. We're into music too, and I do some comedy stuff, but just getting people to think about different things, like you were saying, thinking outside the box is what it's all about. At least for me,
that's what it's all about, and it's the mystery of human origins, and then of course the origins of everything. Just like what's going on, like where did all this stuff come from? You go outside, even if you're just and this used to happen to me, I was used to party. You go outside to have a smoke and you look up at the sky at night and you're like, what the fuck is going on out here? What is all that stuff? Right. And I mean, like, okay, it's stars or whatever, but still you look out and you see at night, you see the universe and you can't help but say, what is out there? Right. So even people who don't necessarily dive into all this stuff, you have this there's a connection with the mystery, and I think this is part of like one of the reasons why ancient civilization or ancient peoples were fascinated with astronomy is because the night sky. Imagine the night sky when there was no light pollution.
It's confronting you. It's like staring up at a mountain, or even more intense.
Right. You look up there and you're like, what is all that stuff? What's that river going across the sky made of that white milky stuff? Like, what is all this? What am I looking at here? What are those really bright ones?
Because the more we learn about it, then the more we actually realize that it just keeps going further and further. Because like you can't even see past the Milky Way from with your naked eye.
Right. Yeah, and then we get stuff that allows us to look a little bit deeper, and we see a bunch of more dots, and then we get something that allows us to look a lot deeper, and we find out that those dots are actually made up of billions of other dots. Yeah. And you're just like, what is going on?
And now they're saying all these dots are contained in a bubble, and there's millions of bubbles.
Right. Just kicking the can down the road.
Yeah. I think stuff's weird. I mean, I don't know. I like to... I don't know if you guys talk about this or you've ever done it, but you guys have ever done like psychedelics and stared up at like the night sky or anything like that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I have before, for sure.
Yeah. It's pretty intense. And
it is intense.
It's hard not to.
But again, I don't even think you need that. It's
you don't need it.
It's a powerful drug all on its own.
But I made this point in the last episode. There's something, and there's a reason why we do a decent amount of our episodes on psychedelics. There's something to be said about the fact that you can walk around in an altered state of consciousness that allows you to think outside the box that your normal consciousness won't allow you to do, no matter how hard you try or practice meditation or lucid dreaming or whatever it is. There's something about taking the substance that you can't, once it's in you, it's not over till it's over, and you have to just ride it out. But it's forcing you it's forcing you to look inwards. It's forcing you to examine your surroundings. It's forcing you to kind of take everything in. And I don't know. I think it's super. I've been looking through a lot of these ancient civilizations and looking at the inspiration for a lot of stuff, whether it be geometry, structures, different things. And I have no reason not to believe that psychedelics had a huge influence, whether it had been Soma, Kikien, which would be the Greek Eleusinian mystery drink or wine or whatever they were mixing, which they think had claviceps purpurea, which is ergot, which is the precursor to LSD, which we know Plato, Pythagoras, Socrates, Aristotle all took part in those things. You look at the symbology in ancient Egypt, you've got the blue lotus, which is a hallucinogen or hypnotic hallucinogen with aporphine as its active psychoactive ingredient. In ancient Egypt, you also have a lot of acacia, which can be extracted. If you mixed acacia with Syrian rue, which is both are super prevalent in that area, that's Middle Eastern ayahuasca right there. So,
wow. And then of course there's all the
drugs.
Yeah, There's also the cocaine mummies, so Egyptians, they like their smokes and blow.
Yeah, I forgot about that. They found
they were having a good time too.
They found traces of cocaine, and I forgot about that.
Just imagine what that looked like.
But I'm not saying that drugs are the beginning of it all. But I do think that when you're looking, I've been trying to get down to, like I said before, studying the mind and like inspiration and how people come to some of these thoughts and what is truly original. If you look at the truly original artists, a lot of them have used psychoactive substances, whether it be musicians, whether it be, some of our favorite, we toured around Following Fish. They're super psychedelic heavy band, and same thing with Grateful Dead, Jimi Hendrix, you name it, super psychedelic stuff, and I love all that kind of stuff. So that's just I've been looking into these ancient civilizations, and I've been finding a lot of correlations to inspiration. And when you go into a super deep psychedelic trip, it's hard not to see geometric shapes, triangles, those kinds of things. So it makes you wonder.
Snakes, patterns and snakes everywhere.
Yeah. I told you earlier, the snakes for sure.
Old Coexel.
These are some of the most primitive images, but they're also some of the most powerful ones as well. So,
yeah, I don't doubt that psychedelics played a role in a lot of these ancient cultures. It's hard to say how much of their philosophy of life or anything, like, especially when it comes to, there's a lot of stuff around that looks like it was an engineering school where nobody was doing psychedelics.
Yeah, that's right.
They were making precision tools and stuff.
Right.
And maybe they did on their time off, but there's no, to my knowledge, there's no, like, I guess in South America, there's an ancient tradition of the ayahuasca stuff, but then there's just all these structures up in the Andes that, like, who built this stuff?
Yeah.
And
you could talk to Randall about this. I'm sure you guys do that Cosmographia podcast with Randall Carlson. Hiram Abiff, the architect of King Solomon's Temple, you look at Masonic symbology, there's the acacia branch.
That's right.
Which acacia is is the highest containing plant that has DMT in that region, I'm pretty sure. And I know that we're going to have this guy on here this weekend, but P.D. Newman, he wrote a book called Alchemically Stone that talks about Freemasonry and the ancient history with psychedelics and stuff like that too. So I do think there is some sort of play there. Like you said, it's not probably fundamental and all that, but if you look at some of the secret mystery schools and stuff like that, I do believe these things play a role, especially in ancient Egypt, where you see the blue lotus on like tons of things. Yeah,
and I can totally see how the language of symbolism could have been derived from the hallucinogenic experience, because of, like you're saying, all the geometry, all of the you're looking at the sky and you see these forms or a
primordial archetypes.
So it makes sense that you could like the strange symbolism that is a language that sort of, like, the Masonic tradition carries on, even into hieroglyphics. Like, that type of written language could have been inspired by hallucinogenics. That seems totally plausible to me.
Yeah. I like I said, I think it's you said partially responsible or has a hand in it. I like to find different purpose and why we assign meaning to things, but who came up with the meaning and why. So I think that's a fascinating topic. So,
and I also think that just like with any other talent, just like there are certain people who are just brilliant mathematicians or just a prodigy in music, there are people that show up that are geniuses when it comes to spiritual understanding, or whatever you would want to call it, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And those people are the ones that end up, I would assume, those people are the ones that end up leading other people to those same kind of revelations. Just like a brilliant martial artist or piano teacher or whatever will try to teach.
Mm-hmm.
You always, somebody who has an enormous skill like that, they do a lot of quote unquote performing, but they also end up having a school. And so I imagine that, those kind of people show up on occasion, a few of them every generation, that have this have this ability with seeing the world through the lens of what most of us have to take psychedelics in order to achieve. These people can do it all the time.
Sure.
Yeah.
So
I think it's possible. I do think, though, I mean, when you really do them right, though, once in a while, and it's not something you do regularly, I do think there's something that propels you from those experiences. It's not just in the experience either. It's the feeling that it gives you afterwards, and the outlook on what you need to get done going forward, and things you need, your things that inspired you. But yeah, I agree with you. There's definitely geniuses out there that have a knack for certain things. But I was just talking about when we were talking about like geometry and pyramids and basic buildings and temples and stuff like that.
I guess what I'm
Pythagoras.
Sorry,
I was just talking about like Pythagoras, or Euclid, or these guys that came up with the basic forms of geometry. Well, we know they went to Egypt and were taught there, but how in depth were the Egyptians with that? I'm sure they were amazing, since they were amazing builders. But is it the same thing as in terms of symbolisms, like one means one, or is one just the number? Do you know what I'm saying? Like they would count 1 or 2 as 2 ones, that type of a thing. They're not really looking at it from the same standpoint that we look at math today, if you get what I'm saying. Yeah.
I guess what I do get what you're saying. I think, and so I think that Pythagoras and Euclid, these guys made, they went and learned something that came from some much more ancient mystery school, and then they came back to Greece and they put their, not spin, but they put their own flair onto it, and that's what ends up into Western culture, and eventually evolves into what we know as modern mathematics, or modern chemistry, alchemy. All that stuff comes from Egypt. But they themselves claimed that it came from much older traditions, right? And so what I was saying about the people who are geniuses is I'm saying that I think that even these mystery schools, they must have originated somewhere.
Sure.
They have to have started from somewhere.
Well, I mean, Terence McKenna takes the stuff for the psychedelic stuff. He goes back to our transition into Homo sapiens, and the plains of Africa. There's cow patties everywhere.
Stoned ape.
Stoned ape theory. I'm not, and I don't go by the stoned ape theories of like take it as with a grain of salt. Like it could have been a contributing factor, maybe adding to visual acuity and maybe enhancing certain aspects of our lives. But it's hard to dismiss the mushroom thing because they grow on every continent and they're pretty prevalent
everywhere.
So,
yeah, but I also like the idea, and I say like because I don't know. I don't think this is. I'm not saying this is true, but I like this idea.
So you're saying it's true.
Let me make this clear here.
Let me make this clear. This is totally the truth, guys. You truth seekers out there. But I like the idea that it's more than we just found the mushroom in some. Some guy ate it and was like, "Whoa, dude!" And then he showed it to his friend Dog, and he ate some too.
I don't believe that either. I'm just saying I think that when you look at because I'm talking about creativity, and I think our purpose on this planet is to create. That's my personal belief. Whether it's other people, art, music, whatever it may be, I think that's our purpose. If you believe hypothetically that there is some creator God or one consciousness or whatever, you would want that thing to spread out and be as original as possible and spread out as far as possible, and everything's an offshoot of something else. And I think that with psychedelics, it allows you to break free from the copying off of each other, or maybe taking too much of this last guy's ideas, that kind of a thing. It allows you to think outside the box, where normally your day-to-day consciousness might keep you contained and maybe not as an open mind to new ideas or groundbreaking ideas, that kind of stuff. But again, there's geniuses out there that don't need it too. So
yeah, it does definitely cause neuroplasticity. I think that's where basically you can whole new pathways can be generated in your ways of thinking. And I agree with that too. I guess what I'm talking about is the very ancient sort of maybe shamanic concept that it is the spirit realm that gets us involved in these things, right? When people have been asked, well, how did you guys know how to make this ayahuasca brew? And they're like, well, the plants told us, right? That's what I mean. Like the plant, there's something in the natural world that is not physical that nevertheless interacts with us on a daily basis, and some people are better at paying attention to it than others.
Right.
and those people end up being the shamans or the people who are being abducted by UFOs or whatever. You know that.
And they have their toolboxes.
Yeah. The ancient handbags, the ancient Gucci's.
That's right.
Yeah, that one's still baffled. I think that's probably, to me, you were asking me what's the greatest mystery earlier or whatever. I think that's the greatest mystery. What's in the bags? It's found everywhere.
Yeah.
It's found in ancient Aboriginal artwork. It's found. There's a guy, we've had him on the show before. He wrote a book Into Africa, Bruce Fenton. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. So he's got a website. He has a lot of good stuff on there on what he thinks it could be or what that is. But Graham Hancock thinks it's a bag containing psychedelics of some sort that would be them carrying knowledge to the civilizations, which is kind of the basis of a little bit of what I was just talking about, or inspiration. But and then you've got other people that say, oh, it's just seeds because that was the beginning of agriculture, animal husbandry, that kind of stuff. I don't know. Somebody commented that there were buckets of water, and that's how they would, in the desert, that they would reflect the light from the stars to create certain structures and different things. I've heard all sorts of different theories. So
yeah, I have thought before I ever heard the man bag thing. I did think that they were buckets. I thought that they were. Because a lot of them are also holding this.
Yeah,
so
the
it's
pine
like they've
cone.
got the right. Yeah, and it's. Yeah, so I think, we're looking at fruit of knowledge and water of life or something like that. And again, those are symbols, and I don't know what they mean, but...
Well, the Sumerian ones, the tree of life is Homa, which is... We're making a movie, like a short movie on this right now. I'm working on it. But Homa and Soma split off during the Indo-Iranian migration. So you had the people that went into northwest India from the top of the Caspian Sea, and then you had the other people that went down into modern day Iran. And the split off, they both had this word Homa, and then one split off. The Iranians called it Haoma, and the Indian people called it Soma. And Soma is obviously, if you've read, I don't know if you know much, but it's the ancient concoction. Nobody really knows what it is. Some people
knows what it is. Yeah.
Some people think it's a mushroom. Some people think it's a mixture of like ephedra, cannabis, and tobacco. We're gonna make a movie on this because I have my own take on it. But the point being is that these were, the basis for the Rig Veda, which is the most ancient written text that we know of, and then the Iranians came up with the Avesta, which is the book of Zoroastrianism, which is the longest running religion, continuously running religion, I think, to this day. So I don't know, it's some interesting stuff, but the point being is these things all come from one place, and I think that's, in a bigger picture, what we keep talking about is everything comes from this one source. What is this thing? Is it this, like you said, connection to some sort of spiritual realm or the universe or something like that? Is it, I know you brought up Laird Scranton. His theory is there's these two realms. There's the realm that we live in now, and then there's this spiritual or non-material realm, and every once in a while these two realms get closer and closer and closer together, and there's this like bridge thing that happens, and when the bridge things happens, it's almost like a golden era where more knowledge is passed over, more stuff is getting done, that kind of stuff, and then it floats back out, and it's this cycle, and that's pretty much the basis for most of his books and research. But I don't know what to think. I like to think of myself as a spiritual person. I meditate and stuff. It's just hard to really know what's going on. It's a real mind fuck for sure.
It's a mind escape.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. I'd like to think of myself as a spiritual person. I meditate and stuff.
I do. Well, I grew up going to Catholic school, so I've had the other end of it too, but there's something about going to church, and I don't know. One day you wake up and you're like, what's going on here, really? So
yeah, if the path must be followed wherever it leads.
Well, you're going to tell me a book's 100% fact when 30 people wrote it, things have been taken out, things have been added, Council of Nicaea, all that stuff. So it's I woke up one day, I'm like, started questioning stuff, and here we are.
Here we are. Yeah, I think that going back to what are the greatest mysteries, what we've talked a lot on our podcast about the agriculture problem. We call them the triple A's of ancient civilizations. That you got architecture, agriculture, and astronomy. Mm-hmm. And those are the three things we see that they did. Those are the things that are left to us. And they had obviously many more things than that, but a lot of times all that's left is we see is their architecture, and that they were doing agriculture, and then the astronomy. And so, agriculture is a huge mystery. It's still not clear how it was done in terms of domesticating turning wild plants into domestic crops. And turning wild animals into domestic ones to the point to where you change their to where you change their morphology to where they look different than the original wild animal. This is not a trivial thing, And Kyle and I've gone back and forth on imagine you're a hunter-gatherer people, and you decide you want to be farmers. There's nothing to farm because everything is wild. So how do you start? How do you turn that wild grass into giant, into fields of wheat? No one knows the answer to this question. No one knows how this was done. And there's lots of evidence that it was done very quickly in some cases. I mean, because as we've been doing farming and doing orchard and vineyard stuff for the past 4 years. This is not an easy job. Mm-hmm. It's incredibly hard. And if you're starting out with a crop that's wild, that can't really feed you, and you're and you go with the standard model idea, which is that they culled it, and they kept replanting the better stuff until eventually you have this sort of mutation that happens over time, like how they talk about breeds of dogs. Well, how do you start with a wolf and end up with a pug?
Right.
How did this happen? Yeah. Who did this? Right. How do you domesticate an aurochs into cattle?
Well, do you think though they took like wheat, like they go, oh, this is wheat, we like this, so let's take the seeds from this, start throwing it in the ground and clear out areas? I mean, I don't know. That's just what. Yeah,
but the problem is that with the native grasses that we know that almost all the wheat in the world comes from is these native grasses in the area around Turkey, Göbekli Tepe area. You can't eat that stuff. It isn't
it's
wheat.
Like different genetics or whatever.
How did they turn that grass into wheat? And if they did it in the way that the standard model says, it takes generations.
Right.
And so you plant a whole field of grass that you can't eat. And then the next year you plant an entire other field of grass that you still can't eat. And maybe your grandchildren will be able to have wheat. That's not sustainable. You have to eat now, right?
Uh-huh. So we've created things like, I don't know, most people don't know this, but broccoli and Brussels sprouts are forms of cabbage. You can't find those in the wild on their own because it's something that we've created.
Right.
They're genetic variations of cabbage.
Yeah. So
I would maybe even look into that, and maybe that's like a primitive version of what they did with that then.
Right. And again, that's something that's happening. I'm assuming are you talking about that's something that happened recently?
Well, yeah, I'm sure, I don't know if I don't even remember where I heard this, but I remember thinking that's, and then looking it up, and I'm pretty sure you can't find cauliflower and Brussels sprouts in the wild that are not part of some sort of like farm.
Okay. Yeah. So the question then is, how old are they?
Right.
How long have people been growing them? And then if you find out that they're thousands of years old, you're like, okay, who did that?
Right.
Where did bananas come from?
Right.
What bananas are not wild plants, and then there's also corn, maize. This was a staple throughout the ancient world, and there isn't anything like that that's wild.
Right.
So where did they come from? And if it happened thousands of years ago, and we don't know how it happened, you have to start thinking about how advanced were they really? There's two ways to go. Did they have high technology, or were they manipulating the plants on some completely other level? Talking to the spirits of the plants.
You brought up Viracocha and Quetzalcoatl earlier, and both of those guys brought animal husbandry, agriculture, and taught the people not to sacrifice each other and to sacrifice flowers or whatever instead.
Exactly.
So, I mean, who is this Viracocha? Who is this Quetzalcoatl?
Right.
I think, doesn't Graham Hancock say he's different than the native people too? Like, He's
the native people say that. Yeah.
Yeah. In their mythology, but in his book, he describes him almost as looking like what a Jesus archetype would look like.
Tall, aquiline-faced white guy with beard.
With a long beard.
Native people don't grow beards here in the Americas.
Right.
So you don't have bearded people here, and then but all throughout their most ancient mythologies, you've got these tall, robed, bearded people that are moving around in their mythology, teaching them how to be civilized. It's a very strange and interesting story. Mm-hmm. And yeah, you're right. So that the civilized, and even with the Greeks, I mean, if you're going through the Greek stuff, I'm sure you've run across Oannes, right? Mm-hmm. And Laird Scranton talks about him too. Comes out of the water.
Right.
Seems to be half man, half fish. Or that's how they describe him anyway. He teaches people how not to be cannibals and how to build things and how to have a civilization. And every night he goes back into the ocean.
Right.
Well, who is that?
And that's
also Viracocha, foam of the sea, comes out of the water, teaches people stuff, and then leaves into the ocean again.
All right, I got to go back to the Brussels sprouts thing for a minute.
Okay.
So the origin of the cultivar is not exact, but the French coined the name in the 18th century. It was common to put a landmark on food. Whether they actually were developed in Brussels, in Belgium, is not certain. There are records of Brussels sprouts around where Brussels is as far back as the 13th century.
Okay.
But brassica, the cabbage family, vegetables are said to have been cultivated for thousands of years. The plants have a great tolerance to salt and limestone and other harsh soils. No one knows for sure where the first plants started. These wild plants that resemble leafy kale were selected and crossbred to what has become the varieties we know today, like cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, and Brussels sprouts. So again, it was thousands of years ago, and they're just saying the standard model. Well, they kept crossbreeding them until they got this.
Right.
They don't know.
Right.
So that's what I mean. Like most of the stuff we eat, meat included, we don't know where it came from.
Right.
I mean, like if I go out and shoot a deer, and I get some venison, that's one thing. That's a wild animal. That's a hunter-gatherer type of activity.
Sure.
But all the meat you buy in stores is mostly domestic cattle or domestic animals, and then all the vegetables you buy in store are domestic crops, and we don't know where they came from or who invented them and how.
Right.
That's a huge mystery. And then we're also led to believe that this was done, especially if you're looking at the areas of Jericho, Göbekli Tepe, 12,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. People just decided, well, we're done walking around and picking pears off trees. Let's
take off your butt flap.
Take off your butt flap, and let's build this gigantic structure and turn all these animals into other animals that are easier to manage, and so we can eat them. But we're supposed to believe.
Sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, and let's also invent beer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No. Let's do all this because we'll be able to make beer later.
Yeah. Well, or eat mushrooms,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those weird things that we obviously don't have an answer for,
but he's right. No one even thinks about that stuff.
But I think though that the animal husbandry and the agriculture thing, I get what you're saying. Obviously it takes a long time, many generations, but I could see. I mean, people have pet wolves now. If you were to keep continuing to have pet wolves, and then your kids had the offspring of those pet wolves, and then kept going down and down and down and down, I could see where at some point you've basically got a husky.
Yeah, see, that's except that hasn't happened. That's the problem with that, is that it hasn't happened.
There's no modern analog.
There's no modern analog. In other words, like, people have pet wolves,
But I'm not talking about like just a couple. I'm talking about like a long succession of.
Right.
But I get what you're saying. So, but I guess where are you going with this? Do you believe then that there was all these different types of species, and then not, let's say, all dogs come from wolves, or not all Brussels sprouts come from cabbage, or do you get what I'm saying, or like where are you going with that?
Well, I think one of the most interesting things to me, and this is something that I've been thinking about recently. Before very recently, I would have just told you I don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the answer is. But what I've been thinking about recently, because we've been talking to Randall a lot about the Younger Dryas and about this, there was this humongous extinction event that happened there.
Right.
And then we already know, because of Göbekli Tepe, like modern standard model science is showing us that agriculture starts right after the end of the Younger Dryas, and all this stuff appears that didn't exist before that. Well, what if it did? You know how many plants go extinct in a mass extinction event? A lot of them.
Oh, for sure.
It was just harder to count those. How many insects go extinct in a mass extinction event? Probably hundreds of millions of species. There's so many of them.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So we don't know, but if there were people who preserved, in other words, if there was an advanced civilization before that extinction level event, and they preserved, like all the myths say, save these animals and plants in the Ark or in the whatever, in the Vara, as the Zoroastrians did,
right.
Save them somehow,
Yima.
and then you show, Yima, and then you show back up afterwards and find the people who survived it, and then start teaching them how to be civilized and giving them agriculture. And what you're doing is giving them plants that were around before the extinction level event that do not exist anymore because they've gone extinct.
Right.
So that may be one of the answers, is that they weren't turned into something from something else.
Well, we've got that seed bank in, what is it, Greenland or Iceland, one of those two.
Right.
Isn't there that seed bank where it's the Doomsday seed, whatever?
We've got Doomsday Seed Bank, and we've got Moon Library.
Moon Library, yeah.
Perfect.
We're going to be fine, folks. Everything will
Unless
be
that
fine.
place goes under.
And then we got the vault behind the Mount Rushmore too. God knows what's in that.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying is, like, you think of all these myths and all these stories where the people, number one, are forewarned of some coming event that's going to destroy everything, and then they're told to save all the animals and plants, not all the animals and plants in the world, but the ones that are good to eat, basically.
Right.
And they save those, and then they re-inject them into civilization after the event is over. And so that's where I've been thinking, like, maybe a lot of these crop plants just are extinct versions of stuff that were around before, and that's why we can't find the original.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely interesting. I haven't studied too much of the agriculture side of the ancient civilization stuff, but I do find it interesting because you're right. I do think what were people eating? That's a huge part of learning about people is, I mean, we do it 3 times a day, so.
Yeah, you got to eat. And when you have the bigger the group of people, the more food you need, and the harder it is to deal with that.
Especially if you're building megalithic structures and different crazy things.
Yeah, and who knows? The better stuff you eat, your brain might act differently too. Well, it does. So
yeah,
if you're eating better diets, your brain is going to function better. Therefore, you come up with better ideas.
That's how they think we evolved from that shrew that we were initially said to be the earliest form of what we are now. It was a tree shrew that it was eating these sweet fruit that had glucose, and then their brains started to get all this crazy stuff.
Yeah, they were getting high on sugar.
Yeah, getting high on sugar, and then we started to evolve from there. I mean, who knows? But it's all interesting.
Good stuff, man. Good stuff.
I wanted to ask you, though, what's your top theory of how the Great Pyramid was built, and do you think it was built by Khufu, or do you think, since the only proof that we have of that is the cartouche that it's like basically graffiti, and
the wise graffiti,
and then also, and the Howard Weiss thing blowing into it, the dynamite, but so there's that. But what's your favorite theory on how that was built, and when do you think it was built? I mean, I've looked into this. I've looked at the external ramp theory, the interior ramp theory. I think that's Jean-Pierre Louboutin's theory, the internal ramp theory. Or what's your theory? What do you guys think happened?
Don't really know, but I tend to think that it was probably multiple stages of construction, like so many other ancient monuments left. It could have been. I think that it was going to be involved in the original ground plan that included the Sphinx. So if the Sphinx goes back 12,000 years, I think that the ground plan for the Great Pyramid and the other two of that group of 3 are part of that ground plan. But specifically with the Great Pyramid, the interior structure is so strangely built compared to what's built around it. It seems to me that it may have been a totally different thing originally, and may have been. I think Robert Bouval talks about this, like that the King's Chamber, the Grand Gallery, and all of that stuff was originally astronomical observatory type of thing, and then the pyramid structure was built around it later.
Yeah.
Is that Buval? I can't remember. I shouldn't attribute it to him. I'm not sure, but
yeah, I agree with
the
Kyle.
The watcher just called. He said you're wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Dang it, Watcher. Where the hell are you when we need you?
Cool. Keeping my percentage up there.
No, it might be actually. I read one of his books, Black Genesis. I'm sure it might have been in there somewhere. I forget, but
yeah, I don't know who built it or why. I don't know what it is. You look at it and you're like, what is that thing? Mm-hmm. Like, what's it for? You know, you look at the interior stuff and you're just like, this is hard to understand in terms of it doesn't even look like it doesn't even seem to fit the temple kind of. It's not a place you go into like temples are, where they're columns and they're beautifully imposing, and it's not the same. It's something else.
I don't think it's a tomb.
No.
I don't think it was originally supposed to be a tomb. Somebody may have come along and tried to make it a tomb.
Intrusive burials, yeah.
I don't think it was a tomb. I think it's possible that it was built it was repurposed, but not really sure about that either. It could have been all built by a single design for a single purpose.
What about within 20 years? Do you think it was built in 20 years?
No, I definitely think it was older. I definitely think it's older than what the Egyptologists say.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I don't think it was built by a crazy pharaoh for a tomb. Like, hey, I wanna, inter my body somewhere where nobody's ever gonna find me. So let's build the biggest structure on the face of the planet.
Right.
Yeah. Genius idea, Johnson.
Well, I think though, like if you look at their connection to the stars, and I don't necessarily think it's a tomb either, but if their connection to the stars, their fascination with death, we know that they would come. So the Egyptians, the afterlife, the Book of the Dead, they're talking about some sort of a meetup place once you die. So maybe that was the meetup facing Orion's belt, something like that. I could see something like that possibly, but I've looked into a lot of different theories, but I like the one where the farmers that were also handy and skilled laborers would have nothing to do during the wet season when the Nile would flood. So you can't grow crops, you can't do stuff when that happens. So why not go build this thing? And you're right, I have no idea what purpose it was built for either, but it makes sense that instead of slaves, instead of some large sum of people that were forced to do it or whatever the case may be, to have these skilled masons and trade workers when they're during the wet season when the Nile would flood would then go to work on the Great Pyramid. I think that would make sense to me.
Yeah. Well, so I agree with you that they seem to have had a fascination with, I don't know if I like to say death, but with the transition from life into afterlife. Mm-hmm. Probably is more like, they weren't, it wasn't about death to them, it was about what happened after.
Well, death, rebirth and the scarab and all. I get it. With dying, the process of dying and what happens where they obviously had strong beliefs that you go somewhere when you die.
Yes. My favorite, so what I'm getting at is my favorite idea is that the dynastic Egyptians didn't build it. Mm-hmm. So you can't really take any clues from their culture in terms of like what was it built for. And actually what I really like, and this is, again, I'm not saying I believe this, I'm saying that this is my favorite idea, is that they found it pretty much just like it is. I mean, well, put the casing stones on. Maybe they added the casing stones
and claimed
themselves.
It as their own.
Well, and not even that, because what I see,
revered it.
Revered it. They viewed it as a remnant of Zep Tepi, right? The first time, the period of when the gods ruled the earth, or maybe the second period where it was the followers of the sons of Horus that were ruling everything. But because what you see actually when you look everywhere else is you see this progression of little mastabas, right? And the mastabas are basically miniature pyramids. Right. And those are filled with dead people. Those were actually tombs. This is why there's this idea that the giant ones are just the kings, the tombs of the big people. But what I actually like the idea of is that the dynastic Egyptians show up in this area and they see this gigantic thing, and that what they think is that that's the That's the home of the god or the tomb of the god or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so they begin to bury themselves in little pyramids.
I mimic, yeah.
They're mimicking it, yeah. And then at some point, they find the entrance. But so if you look at the whole thing about going into the Great Pyramid, the first people in historical periods that penetrated into it, it was Al-Mamun, the caliph, and he blasted his way in. And he was kind of near where the entrance is, but he was off to the side a little bit and below it. And they blasted their way in, and they heard giant blocks moving. They heard thundering noises, and so they tunneled in that direction and found the descending passage. Okay, so they found the descending passage, and now what you have, and there's no evidence that anybody had gotten up into the upper parts of the pyramid before that. So what I liked the idea is the Egyptians, the ancient Egyptians, eventually found their way into the descending passage and learned that instead of there being all this stuff in the structure, there was actually a tunnel that went way down into the ground, and there were a bunch of chambers down there. And then they started burying themselves in long tunnels that went down into the ground with a bunch of chambers in them, like in the Valley of the Kings.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So you see what I'm saying? At first they're building little mastabas because they're
Right.
copying what they think is the house of the god or whatever. And then when they find out that the house of God actually just goes down underground, then they start doing that when they bury themselves.
Right.
And I
could see
it's
that.
a relic. Yeah.
Right.
I think that the pyramid and a lot of stuff in Egypt, the Serapeum and those boxes that are down in there,
Assyrian, probably.
the Assyrian, yeah, the Sphinx itself and the Sphinx temple, all that stuff is relics of something much older.
The thing, though, too, is also when you look at what like I said, the graffiti of Khufu's cartouche in the Great Pyramid, that's the argument, right? That it's possible that he found it or he had his guys go in there and claim it as his own, which is a possibility. And then you have some people, more conspiracy type people, that will say, oh, Howard Weiss went in there and did it because he didn't want to go home empty-handed or something along those lines.
I'm one of those people. One of those people.
Well, I'm not against that, but I'm just saying that's a little bit more, I think, dicey. I think if you wanted to say that, I think it would make more sense because have they dated the dye that was used?
No, that's another problem, and that's why they flipped out when somebody took a sample of it.
Oh,
they absolutely freaking flipped out when those German archaeologists took a sample of the dye and were going to get it dated.
Right.
Yeah.
Of course they did.
And it's also interesting that there are 5 relieving chambers, right, above the king's chamber. Those little relieving chambers. One had already been discovered. That's called Campbell's chamber. 0 cartouches or paintings or anything in it. Weiss finds the next 4, and that's where all of those things are. How convenient is that?
Right.
And it's a little bit weird. So,
yeah,
I'm
again.
hate the dye.
I think it's. I don't know why. Why wouldn't you have it tested? That doesn't make any sense. But
well, it can make sense.
Yeah, it makes sense if you know.
That brings up a bigger question: is how much is actually known and that is kept private or secret or whatever.
Yeah, and also if you go through Weiss's his personal correspondence and his journals, it's weird the timeline there. Like he talks about getting in there into those chambers and there not being anything except a few very small, very incredibly faint marks on the walls.
Right.
That's what he talks about when he first breaks into those chambers.
Right.
So it seems.
And then he like fired his entire work crew and all this kind
gets
of
a whole
weird
bunch
stuff.
of other dudes in there, and then all of a sudden you've got the discovery
starts
of
finding everything.
Yeah.
Right. So then the argument would be what you're saying would support what you're saying, your theory that it wasn't the dynastic Egyptians that built it, that it was either people of Zeb Tepi from the first time or possibly even other people that were maybe not there later on when dynastic Egypt was occurring. It could have been some group that migrated there before that and left or got wiped out or whatever.
You know, there's some very interesting old Arabic stories, mostly merchant stories, journals and logs and stuff of merchant trains that were going back and forth hundreds of years ago, that talk about how, so when they were moving towards Cairo through that area and passing the pyramids, and this is when the casing stones were still on all of them, right? This is before the casing stones came off. That 2/3 of the way up of the big pyramids out there, the color changed. And And it was a line that was the same across all, even though all those pyramids are different heights. That line was at the same height across all, and they called it the watermark.
Yeah.
So think about that. You know, that implies that those structures were underwater, at least for a long enough to leave a mark on them, to where the casing stones above that were much wider. So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I it's all this stuff's just so crazy to think about because there is no real answer, and we might not ever get the truth.
That's right.
Yep.
Maybe not in our lifetime.
Scan Pyramids Project. Come on.
Muons from space.
Yeah, I think with you see a lot of the LiDAR stuff. I know there's that one lady, I don't really like her opinions on things, but she's like an archaeologist that uses satellite imagery to find stuff.
Oh, yeah.
She's always getting into fights with people on Twitter because she's so just woke. So
right. Yeah. Yeah. That's what woke people do. How's that?
Yeah, but
the more enlightened you are, the more fights you get in.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, guys? Come on. Right, guys?
And she's been proven wrong, too. She did one on, she thought she found some early Viking settlement on the East Coast. I think not the Newfoundland one, but a little bit more inward. I forget where. It was in, I think, Canada, near the East Coast somewhere. And she was pushing that it was the earliest Viking settlement or something, that it ended up not being. But it just goes to show you that there is this, again, the academic thing. They're pushing their ideas. They want it to be true. Look, if you were to write, like, let's say I wrote a book tomorrow and I had a theory, and I'm going to push that theory. That's just what you do. It's human nature. It's cognitive bias. It's confirmation bias. It's the way we're kind of programmed is to get what we think is the truth across. So in this forum that we talk about all these ancient civilizations, ancient structures, all this stuff, we're just pushing different narratives. And nobody really has an idea because we don't have a time machine. We can't go back 2,000 years. We can't go back 5,000 years. We can't go back 10,000 years. So it's all just a guess. But I do think that there's more educated guesses to be listened to be found than what's going on right now.
Yeah, the most frustrating thing to me about it is the blockades that are enforced to keep other scientific disciplines from coming in and doing their work and their their specialty work on this, greatest mystery of our past. Like, why would you not allow that to happen? And that's, it just seems nefarious, right? Like the story that they're telling themselves is more important than the truth.
Yeah.
That seems like the only reason why you would not allow physicists or
that it seems like that they're not actually curious.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Right.
That they're not looking for the truth. It's something.
So you're right that we are all like, I have a way that I like to look at these various ideas that I like, and some of them I'm more prone to believe than others.
But you're open to being wrong, though, right?
Right, and especially it's like if there's somebody with a discipline that could go in and check out, do research on this subject, I would want that to happen. Yeah, because it doesn't matter what my favorite theories are. I want to see what the results of that, scientific endeavor.
I'm wrong all the time. I think that you have to I think when you stop admitting you're wrong is
it's a part of growing.
Well, and I think somebody said it, the second you think you know everything, then learning and knowledge is stopped. So the second you don't acknowledge that you could be wrong, or there is some paradigm shift to be had, that you are just done and there's no point of even continuing. So you get a lot of people like that think the way that this paradigm that, or this way that we're taught, that the uniformitarianism and the way that this linear timeline works, when that's taught to so many people, well, of course there's going to be people that take that seriously. That's what they know. They're going to continue on that tradition, just like we're talking about these more esoteric traditions. So again, I don't know. I don't even think those people are necessarily wrong. I don't know, but I think it's the fact that they're so combative about it and they're not even open-minded about it is what you see happening now with this like alternative archaeology, fringe archaeology, and all these other different fringe topics and fringe science things and all this stuff, because there is this fringe, there is this gap, and if you're not going to look into it, somebody needs to. I think that's how you move the needle. You can't move the needle by going at the snail's pace and just keep pushing the border out little by little by little. I think you have to take these giant guesses, these giant leaps, and let people make up that distance from the work that you're doing. So I wish more people would push the envelope a little bit. Like you said, you're a big fan of Tesla. Tesla was 100, 200 years ahead of his time in his thinking and his innovations and stuff like that. So if you get more Elon Musks, more Teslas, more Steve Jobs, more crazy outside the box thinkers, I mean, I think that we would be a lot further by now, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, and this comes all the way back to the topic of answers versus questions. This is one of the reasons I think that it's so much more important to look for questions than answers, because it's answers that trap you into thinking one way and not another. Mm-hmm. Questions are always open-ended, right? So asking the right questions is to me, or seeking the good questions is better than looking for answers, because answers lead you to, that's the end of the problem. You got an answer, you're done, solution, it's over. Right. So even if you do find a type of answer, it should always lead to more questions. That's how I look at it.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I mean, is there anything else you guys wanted to hit on? I think we've done more than a couple hours here. I think we've gotten some work in. I think we might actually turn this into two parts, because I don't know if people will be able to digest more than an hour and a half at a time.
Right on. Yeah.
Everything we said was easy. You guys are the ones that are hard.
Oh yeah.
We're so hard, bro.
You guys are so deep and complicated, and Kyle and I are just like, dude, pyramids are badass. End of story.
I like to go deep with this stuff. It's a blessing and a curse.
Yeah, no, it was a great conversation.
Yeah, it's been a great time, guys.
Yeah.
Oh, we love it. We'll have you guys back on for sure.
For
yeah. Anytime you guys want to come back on, or get Swapcast going again, or whatever the case may be, we're down.
Do it in a month or two. That was awesome.
And we're down for different topics too. We love the ancient civilization and megalithic structure stuff, but we can go anywhere. So whatever you guys want to talk about.
Cool. Yeah.
So
we can talk about pyramids forever. So
yeah.
So why don't you guys plug your website? You guys got to, everybody check out their YouTube channel, Brothers of the Serpent. Subscribe. If you subscribe to us, subscribe to them. Yeah.
So website is brothersoftheserpent.com. Mm-hmm. And almost everything can be found there. We're found anywhere podcasts can be found. We're mostly an audio podcast. The videos are on YouTube. History Shift makes those for us, He's awesome. But
shout out to History Shift.
Yeah, shout out to History Shift. He's great. Follow him on Twitter too. We are also on Twitter at Snake Bros with no vowels, SNKBRS. Mm-hmm. Anybody wants to email us, brothersoftheserpent@gmail.com.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Thank you, we love the emails. Yeah.
And you can check us out at patreon.com/Mike and Maurice. For $2 a month, you'll get exclusive content, videos and audio. Check us out at Mike and Maurice mindescape.com. We're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, and we have a Facebook group as well. So check that out. All right, dudes, we'll get you guys back on again, but that was a super fun talk, and I think we could have talked for a couple more hours if we were left to our own devices here. So.
I want to dive more deep into the Greek stuff, because we haven't done enough of that, I think. So next time we get on with you guys, let's talk.
Yeah,
sounds good.
I'm still studying it. We're going to do the next one. We do the slideshow stuff that we do. I think we're going to do it on the Sophists. And then the part 4 will be on like the megalithic structures. And I think part 5 will be on the Eleusinian mysteries. So,
yeah.
Cool.
But
awesome.
Thanks again, guys. And
thanks a lot.
Oh, also check out, you guys plug your other, the thing you do with Randall.
Cosmographia with a K. You can just look it up on Google, Cosmographia. There's a YouTube. There is so the YouTube videos are posted on Cosmographia, but also under Geocosmic Rex.
Okay.
The Geocosmic Rex ones are posted first, and they're split. They're usually broken up, and then later on, that whole episode is put on the Cosmographia channel all as one piece.
And you guys are also on all podcast formats as well. And they do it with Randall Carlson, who I'm sure you've either seen him on Joe Rogan or anything with Graham Hancock and on his own sacred geometry stuff. And I've
Brad
listened.
Young is in there.
Yeah,
I've listened to. I think you guys did a couple parts on like Atlantis or something. I listened to a couple of those. Those were good.
Yeah, we did a whole long series on Randall's work on Atlantis.
Nice.
Which is actually mostly him. Very interesting. It's mostly him, deconstructing the geological, academic geology's arguments against the possibility of islands in the middle of the Atlantic. He's not actually saying Atlantis is real.
Right.
He's actually going and saying, look what all these geologists have said, that it's totally not possible. And then he takes that completely apart and shows you, no, that's not right.
But he's also using other geologists' work.
Yes,
right? So
that's right. He's showing you that the geological science actually says that, yes, supports there being a sunken area in the middle of the Atlantic around the Azores. So.
Yeah, there was a big push. Was it Bright Insight guy did
the Recot? Yeah,
the Eye of the Sahara, the Recot structure, and
I
know Ancient Architects has done a few on that as well. But I mean, if you're going to look into that stuff, you might as well just look into the descriptions in the Critias and the Timaeus, because that's where a lot of that stuff's found. So.
And that's where Randall starts from. He's going through the dialogues. He's looking at, here's the pieces of information that
Plato
provides.
Right.
So let's go look at the science around, the questions that this leads us to, and see if this is even possible. And it's really great work.
He says that he thinks that the reason people have been looking all over the world, except for in the Atlantic Ocean for Atlantis, is because the geology has basically said it's not possible for it to be there.
Wasn't that the what's his face? Ignatius Donnelly. So like the Azores we actually did a top 5 on this other channel we were going to spin off we were going to do for a while called Ancient Secrets, and we did a video, top 5 locations of Atlantis, and our number 1, based on everything I read, could be the Azores, because the Azores are at a convergence of 3 different tectonic plates. So
that's right.
The way that if you look at the tops of what you see now could just be the tops of mountains when they were describing the mountains of Atlantis and stuff like that.
Yep.
So that's what we came to for that. But I know they came out with some other thing, Donana National Park in Spain. They found a lot of circular man-made structures as well, and the metallurgy looked similar to the explanations and stuff like that. So I don't know. There's so many different things out there. It's hard to keep up with everything, but
yeah. But if you get too far away from where Plato said it was, then can you even call it Atlantis anymore?
Right.
That's another question that we ask.
True.
If you're not looking in the middle of the Atlantic,
if it was 9,600 BC, it might have looked a lot different, the landscape too. So it's hard to go by. Most people use the Herodotus's map of that geography over there, the region. So it's hard to know what things looked like roughly at the same time Göbekli Tepe was constructed. So
yeah, that's right.
All right, boys.
So that's Cosmographia. Yep.
Sweet. Yeah, it's a sweet podcast, and I think that
that one is primarily video. So
yeah, you guys hooking up with him. I think that's a good match for you guys for sure.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun for sure.
Sweet. All right, guys. Well, we will catch you next time.
All right.
Thanks
Have a good night.
Kids. Later.
Good night, Adamu. Get back to work.